Good afternoon, honorable members. When the business of the House is suspended this morning, the honorable member for Long Island had reserved the seat, reserved the floor. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Long Island.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the great people of Long Island, whom I have the privilege of serving in this honorable place. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the resolution moved this morning by the honorable member for East Grand Bahama and the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, before I get into my contribution, I'd like to wish the family of Ms. Hilda Gibson, give them my condolences on her passing earlier this week. She hails from the settlement of Seymour's in Long Island. Mr. Speaker, during my contribution today, I will share the findings of the forensic audit into the affairs at the Water and Sewage Corporation. After my contribution, I intend to table the forensic audit report. The report is titled Project Mako and is dated 9th February 2018. Notably, the report covered a wide range of areas, many of which the current board found concerning upon our appointment. The report conducted an investigation into the widest possible terms in the corporation, reviewing some 108 pieces of evidence, laptops, tablets, etc., forensic imaging of water and sewage server, some 48,600 gigabytes of data was collected, and 50,000 documents were reviewed in preparation of this report. Mr. Speaker, I wish to acknowledge and thank the brilliant, astute, and dedicated members of Water and Sewage's Board of Directors. Mrs. Deanne Wallace-Whitfield, Deputy Chair, Mr. George Carey, Mr. Bennett Minnis, Ms. Nicola Russell Pettigan, and Mr. Carl Oliver. They are the best, most hard-working board that one could be a part of. And I thank them for their countless hours of work and their zeal to see the best interests of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, whilst my minister would not want me to say this publicly, I will. The member for Carmichael is a mentor and a great teacher, a man whom I highly respect. My learned senior is smooth, sincere, calm, erudite, considered, savvy, confidential, well respected, accessible. He exudes no air of arrogance, no hint of pomposity. He is a gentleman's gentleman. And we've been tied to each other in some nexus for years. He has been gracious to me for my years as a teacher, to advice when I became an attorney, to sage advice before and after the nomination process. Whilst votes were being counted in his constituency, Mr. Speaker, on the 10th of May, 2017, the first call I received was from him, beaming for me. And I was asking him, how you looking? But he called to congratulate me. Mr. Speaker, likewise, throughout the campaign, I would call my parents and family that live in his constituency to follow up on his progress on the ground. Mr. Speaker, the member's word is his bond. He's old school, a great Bahamian, a great, great minister, and I am pleased to serve with him in this honorable place. Mr. Speaker,
I'll give him the money.
I was taught, Mr. Speaker, that a man truly owns two things in this life, his name and his word. And the member for Carmichael represents and stands for both. I thank him, Mr. Speaker. I hear you, Prime Minister. The Water and Sewage Corporation is a harrowing tale, a case study, Mr. Speaker, of mismanagement, gross negligence, malfeasance, corrupt or questionable practices, failure to observe and adhere to establish protocols, errant and maverick conduct on the part of senior management, complicity, conflict of interest, and dereliction of duty. Mr. Speaker, one could even go as far as to say some executives have displayed a pattern of dismissive and belligerent behavior with respect to consecutive boards, and that is reflected over time in the board's minutes. Mr. Speaker, the Gladstone Road wastewater treatment plant is a non-operational treatment plant with a total spend to date of approximately $18.3 million. The project had a completion date of March 2014 and was intended to treat wastewater from Bahama and return it for irrigation purposes. The plant was originally intended to be tendered as a design, build, own, and operate facility by a third party. However, that was changed upon the last government coming into office, placing the construction and operational cost on water and sewage. The auditors found that the plant was originally estimated to cost $9.6 million. The contractor has absconded, abandoned the plant, and not looked back since September 2016. At the outset, the tendering process was irregular. There were 4 firms submitted bids ranging from $7.4 million to $31.3 million, with the second lowest bidder being $15.1 million. The contract, in a most inexplainable, and I say that with a wink, turn of events, was awarded to Nassau Island Development Company. NID's bid was given a score of 71.5, the lowest. The minimum accepted score was a 70. Despite protests, NID seemed to have had a guardian angel in the Ministry of Works, and NID was nonetheless awarded the contract. What's more, Mr. Speaker, NID was unable to secure the 100% bond required by the tender, but yet they were not disqualified. And so, given that this company was so special, the standard was dropped, and they were then given permission to secure a 25% bond. Though the contract was awarded, they struggled to secure that bond. So again, in June 2014, they were given yet another special concession and allowed to secure a bond that was 10% of the original contract value. Strangely though, the consultants, Chester's engineers, told Water and Sewage that they were confident that the project could be completed within the scope espoused by NID, and sought to allay WSC's concerns by asserting that technical strengthening of NID's team would lend to the completion of the project. Notably, EY observed that NID was neither well known within the industry nor seen as being technically as qualified as the other bidders. In fact, in an email dated 5th June 2014, then chairman of the corporation, Bishop Lester Cox, wrote the general manager stating, quote, "The board is directed to reverse its decision as per our meeting of 8th May 2014 regarding reinstating the bond at its full value. Quote, after consultation, I have been directed further to reduce the bond in order to assist the contractor accordingly. As such, the bond is reduced to 10% of the original value of the contract." And so, Mr. Speaker, who could have had the power to meddle in and undermine a board in that way? Mr. Speaker, I ask through you, who in the Ministry of Works could the then chairman have consulted with? Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the recommendations from the then board, the management, consultants to terminate NID's contract and/or not to make any additional payments, countless board minutes and emails show that the recommendations were, quote, overruled, that there were, quote, external influences and manipulation, end quote, and they were able to evade termination. In the 9th March 2016 board meeting, it was stated that the board and management had been directed to, quote, seek a cost and completion strategy, end quote, and to, quote, continue the engagement of NID, end quote. NID surely had an angel in high places. Mr. Speaker, a number of questionable payments were made to NID. On 25th April 2016, a questionable payment of $1 million was made to NID directly from the Ministry of Finance, despite objections from the then board, Water and Sewage Management, and the then Ministry of Works PS, Colin Higgs. All internal controls were circumvented. Someone within the then government directed that this payment be made. One can be assured that this report is being referred to the police today. What's more, before this $1 million payment, in June 2014, an $800,000 payment was advanced to NID, despite objections. In fact, following a meeting with Water and Sewage Management and NID reps, then Chairman Cox directed management to take an advance payment of $1.2 million. However, management objected and explained that NID had been paid substantially more than any work done. Chairman Cox's reply is quite interesting, Mr. Speaker, demonstrating that NID's guardian angel might have swooped in yet again. In his reply, he wrote, quote, "We started a meeting at 10 a.m. with the JV, and I am amazed we're still discussing while the project is at a standstill. Maybe I didn't make the minister's request clear, so I repeat, caps, facilitate the payment so that this project can come to a completion," end quote. It is no secret, Mr. Speaker, that the then minister was the member for Cat Island. Mr. Speaker, even after all the advance payments, which have resulted in a budget overrun of approximately 91%, NID removed equipment from the site, equipment paid for by monies paid out of the contract, and sold them. Talk about double and triple dipping. Mr. Speaker, Water and Sewage incurred significant costs due to the over-reliance of management on special contracts. One consultant has, thus far, cost $1.4 million and another $250,000. What's more, WSC management blames all of the budget overruns and delays on these consultants, abrogating all responsibility themselves, and astoundingly, claiming that they themselves lacked the expertise and there was a shortage of resources. I find it unacceptable and tantamount to a gross dereliction of duty. Mr. Speaker, now get this. NID has two shareholders. One, an Anthony Larry Ferguson, and the other, a Merlin Poitier. Merlin Poitier, it is believed, works as a secretary for the law firm of Davis & Co. Given that company law requires that there be two shareholders in a company, and in such cases, many law firms nominate a secretary or someone in-house to form a company, EY checked to see if Davis & Co. was or have ever been a registered agent of NID. It was discovered, Mr. Speaker, that Davis & Co. has never been and currently isn't. In fact, NID wielded such a big stick that in an email to the member for Cat Island, a WSC employee was recommended by NID for a promotion. And surprisingly, the then Deputy Prime Minister wrote to the GM saying the following, and I quote, "The case is compelling. Could you look into and resolve?" End quote. This report demonstrates repeated instances where good sense efforts were overruled. Mr. Speaker, another instance of gross mismanagement and neglect concerned the Eleuthera Naval Base storage tanks. The intent was for the tanks to allow WSC to store water for the purpose of readily supplying residents of Eleuthera with water. The tanks were slated to be completed in December 2014 at a cost of $1.4 million. Mr. Speaker, the contract was never tendered and it was never put to bid. Instead, it was simply awarded to Treasure Coast Development and Construction Company, TCC, an entity owned by one Glenn Lowe. TCC entered a joint venture with a US-based company called SRT Solutions. During that time, a whistleblower from TCC's joint venture partner alleged that improper and dangerous materials were used to line the tanks, materials that could have caused injury and or death to the people of Eleuthera. Notwithstanding that, not only was the whistleblower twice deported, but the GM dismissed the allegations as, quote, convoluted, and instructed the DGM to only review documentation from Mr. Lowe, totally disregarding the whistleblower. What's more, Mr. Speaker, WSC management never notified the then board of these allegations. In fact, the GM admitted to the auditors under questioning that he did not request an investigation from the Internal Control and Compliance Division, as is clearly set out in its charter, and is a long-standing procedural mandate of the corporation. In recent months, WSC management have been seeking authorization to refurbish the tanks or demolish them altogether, without any mention, on the record or otherwise, of the whistleblower's allegations, notwithstanding the current board's very direct questioning concerning the same. As it stands, $730,000 has been spent, yet 3 of the 4 tanks remain inoperable, and TCC was terminated in early 2017. Astoundingly, despite TCC's delays and the allegations, TCC was paid an additional $245,000 even after the allegations of the whistleblower. Mr. Speaker, the report notes that Mr. Lowe, the principal in TCC, constantly bragged about his personal connections and a guardian angel he had at the Ministry of Works, the member for Cat Island. The report refers to board minutes dated 20th March 2017, wherein a management decision to terminate TCC and Mr. Lowe was thwarted because, quote, the ministry has requested that we can give consideration to rescinding the termination letter. What's more, the report cites numerous emails from Mr. Lowe to the member for Cat Island, wherein Lowe was begging and pleading with him to instruct WSC to withdraw its termination letter in March 2017. As a result of this intervention, WSC extended TCC a final opportunity to complete the project by the end of May 2017. TCC again failed to meet the deadline, but WSC was saved by the bell, the election bell. And with a new government in power, TCC was finally terminated. Let me note here that the health of the residents of Eleuthera has not and will not be placed at risk, because the tanks in question, fortunately, were never placed into service. And so, Mr. Speaker, we were further dumbfounded to read of EY discoveries that 2 members of the executive committee, senior and seasoned engineers, had business relationships with the owners and executives of a current water and sewage vendor, that vendor being Cash and Go. Clear conflict of interest. These persons jointly held shares in an entity called Infinity Enterprises Holding Limited, heretofore or hereafter Infinity, with the member for Exoma and Ragged Island. The member for Exoma is the owner of BAF Global Group Limited and its subsidiary Cash and Go. Now here's the kicker. Cash and Go performs bill payment services for WSC, charging a premium for their services, being paid some $150,000 to date. Infinity is developing the Southern Dream subdivision. In 2013, WSC installed the water infrastructure in that subdivision at a cost of $32,000. As if that wasn't enough, Infinity, whose shareholders are, in part, senior WSC managers, attained a loan from BAF, the parent company of Cash and Go. The current balance on that loan is about $430,000, and WSC executives are among the guarantors of that loan. What is jaw-dropping, Mr. Speaker, is that we discovered that a current WSC vendor performed construction services. This is a different vendor in that subdivision, and the proposal for the works that that vendor carried out was negotiated by a WSC executive on Infinity's behalf. Disclosure I repeat, what is jaw-dropping is that we discovered a current WSC vendor, not Cash and Go, a different vendor, performed construction services in that subdivision. And the proposal for the works that vendor carried out was negotiated by a WSC executive on Infinity's behalf. Disclosure of these business relationships either never happened or only happened when approvals were sought. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, one of the aforementioned executives were also involved, again, with a friend, who was the member for Exuma, and BAF, and another subdivision venture. Negotiations were handled by this executive, who was deemed as the paid project engineer / inspector for that entity from August to December 2014, and who negotiated with another water and sewage contractor on behalf of that private venture. What's more, the subdivision received a new water main in 2013 at a cost of $13,000 to the corporation. Mr. Speaker, whilst I will not go to every minute detail of the report, which will be tabled shortly, there were communications by the general manager and other members of EXCOM
Honorable member.
gave great cause.
The member for Exuma, Ragged Island, and Ragged Island, on a point of order?
Point of privilege.
Point of privilege? Could you state the privilege?
Under Rule 37, I believe it is, I am satisfied that, and I believe I wanted the member to finish his spiel there in relation to some of my companies and my businesses done with water and sewage. I believe he's completed. I'm satisfied that my privilege has been breached, Mr. Speaker, and I want to make notice that I intend to defend whatever inferences and innuendos were made, point by point, in due course. I want to further familiarize myself with some of the things that was referenced, but certainly, Mr. Speaker, I have always declared any dealings that any of my companies would have had with the government or any of its agencies. I came to this place as a businessman with clean hands, and I intend to leave politics that way. I will therefore not be drawn into any political witch hunt. Indeed, Cash and Go is a service provider of water and sewage like many other companies, including Commonwealth Bank, Mr. Speaker. But I reserve my position to further detail a point-by-point response to any matter raised concerning me or any of my businesses that I am affiliated with. Of course, what occurs internally to water and sewage is a matter for the new executive chair.
Thank you, honorable member.
Let me refresh. Let me go back to what I said. I never accused the member of not disclosing. I spoke to executives within the corporation where I said disclosure of these business relationships either never happened or only happened when approvals were sought. But Exuma, you could wait on the report to be tabled. All the details are there. All the details are there. Mr. Speaker, you know, I expected to go to an aerobics class today, sitting down, getting up, so I'm not surprised. Mr. Speaker, like I said, whilst I would not go through every minute detail in the report, which will be tabled shortly, there were communications by the general manager and other members of EXCOM that gave great cause for concern. The auditors identified a suspicious text messages from a water and sewage subcontractor to the general manager on 2nd of March 2016. The message asked by the subcontractor concerned whether he could, quote, stop in to drop off the cash now, end quote. Now, the subcontractor is a surveyor, and whilst no response was observed by text from the GM, he was asked by the auditors to explain. He told the auditors that the text concerned membership dues for a professional association for which he is the treasurer. He asserted to the auditors that the subcontractor had brought him $100 that day to pay membership dues. EY was provided with a spreadsheet authored by the GM that he claimed was a summary of transactions. He also provided EY with evidence that he was the treasurer of this association in the form of a letter signed by the secretary of this association. However, Mr. Speaker, the secretary of the association is the same subcontractor who sent him the text message in the first place. What's more, although EY requested a deposit slip or third-party evidence such as a redacted bank statement to prove that this transaction was related to that association and was merely $100 deposited into the account, the GM, who told EY that he was the treasurer of that professional association, was unable to provide EY the additional support requested. Mr. Speaker, there were also findings of suspicious text messages between a senior member of EXCOM and other BAF officials concerning cash or soliciting monies. Mr. Speaker, the report speaks to various questionable interventions on the part of government officials in the corporation's operations, from demanding huge cash payments and so on. In fact, though the then board had unanimously objected to a major payment to NID, the then chairman wrote that, quote, "The matter is out of our hands as board, and I received a call early the other morning regarding the matter, and thus the email I sent was written accordingly. Remainder of funds to be paid," end quote. The email was then sent on to the CFO for payment and copied the member for Cat Island. And so, in this place, who in this place, Mr. Speaker, made that call? Who learned? And Mr. Speaker, interestingly, the auditors discovered that contractors were sent to the corporation executives one-on-one, and they were told to give these contractors any available work. One senior executive admitted, notwithstanding the fact that one contractor's work was not up to par, that WSC had to continue to engage this contractor due to the member for Cat Island's constant directives. Had to continue. No choice. Notwithstanding the work being subpar. In another instance, the GM sent an email dated 9 May 2014 stating that the then...
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Just let the record reflect that the member is alluding much to me through the mouths of others. Through the mouths of others. It would have been rather balanced and fair, as I pointed out to the president of EY, which I have not received a response to yet. I hope to take this up. At the very least, for example, he's now saying, someone said, I said, or directions were given by me. Wouldn't it not have been appropriate for someone to at least bring to me at least the documents to review and ask whether I had any input in it? Would that not have been the fair thing to do? So right now, what is happening is there's this continuous broadside on my character and reputation through the mouths of others. See, I could sit here and I could say what people said to me about others, what said to them. And in fact, I was about to say some things to the Prime Minister today about what others said about others. And I could say that. But I would not do it because it brings unnecessarily the person's image, reputation into question without at least giving them the opportunity to respond. Now, at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, it is not that I would wish to deter the minds of anyone about what they may find. But at the least one would expect is that if you are going to cast aspersions on a person's reputation, the very least one would have expected is that, look, here is what we have discovered. The chairman said you gave these directions, and all the management said you did these things. Here are the documents. What do you have to say about it? Mr. Speaker, in my capacity as the Deputy Prime Minister, many of contracts, many of decisions, many of directions I would have to have given. I would not remember the details of all, but I would at least expect, to be fair, that someone would have said, because I could stand here right now, and I could call a number of persons' names that sit in this front bench right now about what people are saying to me about them. But should I do that? Right? Should I do that? No, it is not right to do it. Right? I could do it. Huh? And because until it's only, particularly an international accounting firm, forensic firm, got to use what someone has said to them. Well, you know, the Prime Minister told me to do this, and therefore I did it. And then you go, I could say what people said the Prime Minister said that they should do. They did it. And then at the end of the day, I know nothing about it. We carry the blame for a lot of things. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, where you go and have a professional auditing firm to investigate matters, they discover things that were said to them that find itself, for example, I am directed to do these things. Well, who gave the directions? You know, for example, the member spoke to a payment being made to NID for $1 million.
$800,000.
Right? That's what he said. And he said that objections were taken for that payment being made. Right? I recall who instigated the objections to the payment. I recall who gave the directions to write about the payment. But he leaves it to say that, for example, some guardian angel. In fact, he said that Mr. Colin Higgs wrote the letter of objections. Well, Colin Higgs was my permanent secretary. Right? He was then too. Right? He wrote the objection. Did he write that without my input? Would he have done that? Right? If the guardian angel to whom he alludes to was complicit in that payment, would he have allowed his permanent secretary to write, to expose the permanent secretary in that way? No. So, you see, Mr. Speaker, so what I'm saying is that you now create this specter, right, about my reputation, and to each of them I may have the reasonable response. Now, they may still find, they could make their own findings, but all I ask, no, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, I'm giving you some liberty. I'm giving you.
Yes, but Mr. Speaker, I think this is an appropriate time to me to have made this intervention. And I do thank them for allowing me to go this far, because it is a matter that involves my privilege as well. Right? The member could speak about Colin Higgs, my permanent secretary, writing to object, but we're not carried further to say whether or not, how did he get to write the letter? Was the minister involved? And how does that line up with his portrayal of a guardian angel?
Speaker, the report is two part. This is the report. This is the exhibit to the report. Once the report is tabled, all of the members' questions will be answered. And I can guarantee the member that if he gives me a few more minutes, and I'm owed, I think, an additional 30 plus, if he gives me a few more minutes, Mr. Speaker, this report will get in his hand quicker than the chairman of EY would get him to report or a response. I read his email or his letter.
Honorable member.
The point being made is this.
You're on a point of order or privilege?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, he's yielded. I asked him to.
I don't wish to yield, Mr. Speaker. Oh. He has the point of order. He can take the point of order, but I'd like to proceed.
The point of order, Mr. Speaker,
Yeah.
is not on whether I received the report now and that the details might be in the report. The point of order I made is the duty of being fair in matters of this nature, right?
Honorable member.
And that is the point I make.
That is not an infringement of the rules in terms of laying a report either.
Oh no, I'm not objecting to laying up the report. What I am objecting to, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that the member is summarizing the report, adding to it his own storyline about the report by creating the guardian angel, right? And Mr. Speaker, what I'm suggesting is that the report is faulty because wherever it mentions anything about me, I've not seen the report, and all the more I'm making, the point I'm making, anything that is said about me, and I dare say the member for Exuma, we have not had the opportunity to respond to any of the potential findings of the writer, right? But now it's out there in the public domain, right? And that is something that they would have done without our input. That is an egregious offense to the duty of being fair.
Honorable member for Long Island.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to proceed. As I indicated, the report will speak for itself. And if the member for Cat Island would give me my time, he'll have the report shortly. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in an email sent on the 9th of May 2014, the then DPM, who's the member for Cat Island, sent a gentleman to the corporation for, quote, any available work. And it is, quote, and this is what was said, it is proposed, this is what the GM said now, that he was instructed to do by email. It is proposed to test him, the gentleman sent by the member, on a cleaning contract for Prospect and for sewage services at Blue Hill and Soldier Road, end quote. Mr. Speaker, it is even recorded. Mr. Speaker, I'm not yielding, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, a point of order.
I'm not yielding, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is even recorded in board minutes where one former board member, a deputy chair, no less, wrote the then Prime Minister and the member for Cat Island, who was copied on that email, stating, quote, we need to deal with these F&M cronies in the Water and Sewage Corporation, end quote. There were many other instances of interference by officials in the tendering process, and so on. Speaker, there were gross irregularities concerning the Blue Hills reverse osmosis expansion contract, and the contract's non-compliance by Consolidated Water. Auditors discovered that Consolidated Water first received a contract in 2005. An amendment to the contract was then executed in 2011. Thereafter, major complaints arose concerning red and rusty water. The auditors found that a previous report was carried out which discovered that the amendment reduced important water quality standards that were set in the original. When asked why WSC never rejected the unsatisfactory water from Consolidated Water, General Manager told auditors that the demand for water in New Providence was too high and did not allow for rejecting unsatisfactory water. And that one of the reasons for removal of the water quality standard was because they intended to use a corrosion inhibitor, which should have addressed the red water issue. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? That inhibitor was never used. When questioned as to why, the GM responded, quote, that it fell through the cracks, end quote. In an interview with engineers, the auditors also reported that allegations were made that the GM adjusted the water quality standards, and they produced a draft copy of the water quality standards in his handwriting, which showed edits to the water quality table. Staggeringly, an employee twice dismissed, Mr. Speaker, twice dismissed by Water and Sewage, received a lucrative 3-year contract of $3.2 million in late 2016. The auditors assert that the former employee is a close friend of the general manager. He was hired in 1987, fired in 2006 for lack of trust, then was rehired by the GM when he was appointed in 2010, then was again dismissed in 2013 upon instructions from the member for Cat Island, who charged that, quote, he be retired in the public interest, end quote. That's an email from you. That's an email from you. And given compensation. Mr. Speaker, I'm not yielding, so if he has a point, I'm not yielding. I'm not yielding. I'm not yielding. The member charged, Mr. Speaker, that the gentleman be, quote, retired in the public interest, end quote, and given compensation. Amazingly, though this former employee had only worked 22 cumulative years for WSC, as recall, he was fired in 2006 and then rehired in 2010. Though he had only worked 22 cumulative years, he was given full retirement benefits and pension based on 30 years of service. This same former employee owns 33% in a joint venture consultancy known as ACO JV. Ernst & Young observed questionable transactions and dealings involving this entity. Mr. Speaker, the report will speak for itself. But I want to say this, Mr. Speaker. EY made damning observations about this particular contract with ACO JV. In fact, in one instance, ACO JV, the joint venture entity. In one instance, the general manager sent an email directing the bid evaluator to tell ACO JV the target amount and asserted that it was urgent. In the email to the evaluator, who requested whether he should proceed with negotiations, the general manager said, yes. This is the general manager, quote, yes, discuss with DGM. I usually like simple approach. Tell him target amount. I think 3.2, acceptable, and that's in the millions. Then in a follow-up email, he wrote, quote, need to conclude this ASAP. I don't want us having to do another tender without the engineer of record, end quote. This ought never to have happened. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? ACO JV currently has a contract with the corporation for $3.2 million. Target amount. Stunning. Stunning. Dollars. Mr. Speaker, EY discovered an instance which I would add can be coupled with several other such HR instances discovered by the board, wherein no bond was executed to ensure an employee returns to the corporation after undertaking a course of study or being seconded to the private sector. There were other questionable HR practices, not the employee's fault, but many questionable practices and breaches of procedures. EY performed procurement testing for $263,969,100 or in total spend. That expenditure related to 30 vendors. They discovered weaknesses within the procurement policy and means by which the tendering requirement could be bypassed. Relative to the Gladstone Road project, EY discovered that NI failed to meet the public tender's performance bond requirement and was granted a significant performance bond reduction by WSC after being awarded the contract. Mr. Speaker. Moreover, no formal tender process was performed to retain any of the consultants that were used in the Gladstone Road project. In fact, in one instance, EY discovered that WSC only retained a local firm due to a cash Flow Crunch. That firm was brought in 2014 to assist with project cost management. Mr. Speaker, given that the project is 91% over budget, it is clear that that was a failed initiative. Using a sample of WSC's contracts, EY identified 37 contracts valued in excess of $10,000 where no formal tender was undertaken and no alternative option entertained. It could not be shown where management followed a documented exception process or criteria. A few of these contracts were: 1, a contract awarded to Sunshine Insurance with no tender was done. This contract was awarded in May 2016. The former board directed that that contract be completed. The original price, the price they originally came with for annual insurance premium was $438,813. Cheaper than the previous insurer's J.S. Johnson, which was pegged at $474,912. However, Mr. Speaker, a year later, the annual premium suddenly increased to $514,107. Mr. Speaker, board approval was not sought or received by management, nor was a tender process performed for the award of a contract on new service connections. A fixed rate was executed to Bakerwick Construction, Apex, and several other contractors. Between May and September 2017, Bakerwick Construction earned in excess of $254,000. Bear in mind, Mr. Speaker, that connections could easily be performed in-house. The tender process was again bypassed in an award of a contract to Seoul Petroleum. Likewise, EY observed that Castalia Strategic Advisors, Seoul Petroleum, that's what the report says. It could be a typo, but it says Seoul Petroleum. Likewise, EY observed that Castalia Strategic Advisors have a subsisting contract for $250,000 with the corporation. No competitive tender was performed, notwithstanding the fact that the corporation's own technical auditor felt that the consultants lacked the experience necessary for the scope of the project. Mr. Speaker, I have, in the recent past, noted that upon my review of RO documents, I was most disappointed. I indicated then that there should be a paradigm shift relative to these contracts. Amazingly, 22 contracts were given to RO operators without a single one going to tender. Without a single one going to tender. To add insult to injury, EY observed that the contracts on average were for 10 years, have fixed rates that have noticeably increased by 78% in favor of the RO operators, not the corporation, 78% in favor of the RO operators. A formal contract was in place for just one of the 22 plants, with the remaining operating on letters of acceptance that contained no provision relative to insurance, penalties, performance targets, or any legal protection for WSC. This is disgraceful, and I have begun taking steps to address this unfortunate and dicey state of affairs. Notably, EY noted the erratic purchasing of service laterals by Mir Bahamas Limited relative to the non-revenue water project. Mir encouraged the purchasing of such parts from European vendors. This ultimately incurred greater shipping costs, currency conversion fees, and inconvenience to the corporation. The auditors referred to concerns by Water and Sewage's own technical auditor, noting that WSC could be disadvantaged by not purchasing completed and assembled service laterals, by not purchasing these laterals from a single supplier and cutting down lead times by purchasing from North America as opposed to going all the way to Europe. Mr. Speaker, the auditors discovered several instances where contracts were awarded to vendors not selected. Instances of inadequate contract protection for water and sewage, and again I'd come back to the MEA Bahamas example, where MEA has a 10-year contract signed in 2012, valued at $82 million. The contract has performance goals. However, WSC has no way to verify MEA's calculations. WSC has been reliant upon MEA's calculations based on readings from meters MEA installed, using software MEA set up and currently administer. An engineering consulting firm called Water Management International reviewed MEA's calculations and questioned the integrity of the meter readings and urged for a calibration protocol to be a compulsory component of the performance contract. Now, of that 82 million, Mr. Speaker, some 23,775,000 based on performance to date. Notwithstanding, those recommendations were made in 2014 and 2016. That has not been done. The auditors also discovered lack of vendor due diligence and staff independence requirements, and lack of the involvement by the finance or purchasing departments in procurement activities, among many other troubling discoveries. Mr. Speaker, EY analyzed a sample population of 214 disbursements totaling $53,873,200 and representative of 68 vendors. They observed the following. 1, the purchase orders were frequently created after vendor invoices. 2, the disbursements were missing purchase orders. 3, that an executive had approved purchase orders above their limit and in breach of WSC policy. 4, that invalid TIN numbers were on vendor invoices. 5, that valid TIN references were included on invoices, but no VAT was applied. What number was I on? 5? 6. There were insufficient reporting or insufficient supporting documents for payments. For example, several multi-million-dollar payments to MEA Bahamas without any independent evidence produced by WSC, or million-dollar payments to Waterfields Company Limited on invoices raised by Consolidated. 7, invoices were missing stamps confirming receipt of goods and services. 8, it discovered questionable sequential invoices by several vendors, so on. Mr. Speaker, the auditors further found financially unsound and dubious happenings with the billing process and meter readings. In circumstances where customers have secured their premises, they have been allowed to submit pictures of their meter reading. Imagine that, Mr. Speaker, imagine that. You could take a picture and send it in of your meter. If it was me, and it was crooked, you take a picture today and take another one tomorrow. You use that one for the next quarter. So, Mr. Speaker, this opens WSC up to wide-scale fraud. Questionable adjustments to the tune of $5.8 million, or some 24,271 adjustments between January 2016 and October 2017, were also noted. Moreover, there was a lack of control relative to the same, exposing the corporation to great risk. The matter of delinquent accounts is an ongoing concern for WSC. However, what stood out in EY's review was a case of a water and sewage customer blocking access to the meter by using concrete and enjoying a free water supply for 20 years. 20 years. Though the auditors referenced the WSC confidential / do not disconnect list in the audit report, this chairman has discarded any such list. the list of privilege is no more. EY observed that the two largest bills on the list at the time of their review belonged to the former Prime Minister, Perry Christie, and the law firm of the member for Cat Island, Davis & Co. Mr. Christie owed some $23,329. It was the highest overdue balance. The last bill on account was March 2008. The termination date was 19th July 2005. The auditors found that it was never designated for disconnection. Oh, sorry, that it was designated for disconnection, but interestingly, was not on either of the collection agency schedules. In the case of Davis & Co., the bill at the time of review was $22,603. Monthly bills were still being generated. The auditors noted that since June 2017, payments of $7,852 were made, thereby reducing the balance to $15,930. That account is active and has also been, or has also not been, referred to a collection agency.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador.
I'll check.
Speaker, you know, it is very interesting. This matter made the public headline before, right? And I thought that the corporation itself cared of the matters relate to the Davis & Co. bill. It was a disputed bill. According to the lawyers who were working in the office. They disputed the bill. Right? There was an arrangement, there was an agreement to settle it, having settled on what was actually owed. There was an arrangement to pay. The arrangements were in effect being carried out until another bill was placed on, another account bill was apparently placed on the original bill. And that was what the dispute was about. And the arrangement, I gather, has been settled. So I don't know what this is now about. I'll make further inquiries, but as far as I'm aware, the account has in fact been settled because there was a genuine dispute between the corporation and Davis & Co. because of a building that had fell in disuse and was not being used, and the account was being run up. So that I understand to have been settled. And again, to come here to suggest the time has come for the government to govern, stop looking back and start looking forward. I can look back too.
Mr. Speaker, as I noted early on, at the time that the report was being undertaken, they took a look at these accounts. And I also noted that both accounts were not referred to either of the collections agencies that were hired 9 days before the general election. Mr. Speaker, 2 debt collection agencies were retained by Water and Sewage 9 days before the last general election. We have since directed that both be given notice that their contracts are being terminated. Though $5 million was assigned to them, they have jointly collected 5%. And more often than not, much of that money is paid over the counter. And due to accounts being assigned to them, these agencies were still able to exact fees of some 20 to 25%. Much as EY observed, the new board shared a view that water and sewage staff should, at the outset, be incentivized and placed on the front lines for collections as opposed to immediately running and signing up with collections agencies. Mr. Speaker, the report addressed matters such as bad debt write-offs and issues related thereto. It's a very comprehensive report, Mr. Speaker. And given the same, I hereby move to table Project MACO, WSC report dated February 9th, 2018.
Order that the documents be brought up.
Speaker.
Just a moment, just a moment. Order that the documents to lie on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, water and sewage must be realigned, restructured, and reorganized. There are many other matters, union-related, concerning human resources and inappropriate or unethical behavior that must be addressed. We are establishing strict procurement policies, internal control and compliance procedures, and heightened risk management. The intent is to eradicate internal corruption. We're going to implement and ensure transparency and that the highest standards of ethics are observed during the procurement process and the execution of contracts. We will also ensure that requisite accounting controls are put in place and that water and sewage is moved from height to height. Mr. Speaker, I cannot take to my feet today and not address my people in Long Island. Firstly, I want to thank my down home boy for his commentary this morning on the floor, the member for East Grand Bahama. The people of Long Island are very concerned about our airport, and our discussions over the last few weeks and this morning has made my heart glad, to use that family island said. I am happy to note that that airport could well be on the way. Mr. Speaker, discussions with the Minister, the Prime Minister, obviously the Minister of Works, the Minister of Tourism, I feel can reassure my people in Long Island, my constituents, that we will keep our pledge to ensure that they get that much needed airport, which is overdue and goes to Long Island's very lifeblood, Long Island's very survival. And so, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, you are our delivery boy. And we're looking for you. We're looking for you. We're looking for you and my Prime Minister to deliver. To deliver. I'll be back here in June. And we're hoping that we can have wonderful announcements about this airport. Mr. Speaker, with respect to water, we have tendered the initial phase for waterworks in Long Island, and the tenders closed on the 9th of February. However, following the 9th of February, we discovered that there were some questionable dealings with the evaluator, the bid evaluators, ACO JV, and some of their engineers who had been performing works with other contractors. As a result, we've been back and forth with the bank, trying to see our way clear. Yesterday, I had a telecon with the bank, and that's the Caribbean Development Bank, and the local project coordinator at the corporation. And we are finally in a position to make some adjustments to move forward with respect to the Long Island project, and other projects associated with that loan. And also, we'll be making some other decisions concerning those evaluators and so on. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Works and I, we have a really good relationship, and I count on my minister to deliver me some of my infrastructural needs and concerns in Long Island. We need it, Mr. Speaker. My minister has some idea, and he and I will be talking more in the coming weeks and months. I know he's going to come to Long Island at some point as well and participate in the town hall meeting. Mr. Speaker, one of our most immediate concerns is a bank. A major island like Long Island cannot go without a bank. On the 13th of April, Royal Bank has announced that they will be withdrawing their services. I met with Scotia Bank officials a few weeks ago, and they have taken a wait-and-see, non-committal approach. In fact, they have not indicated that they're prepared to expand beyond their semi-operational facility, which does not accept cash. And so, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister, the member for East Grand Bahama, and I have been in talks to see how best we can get the Bank of the Bahamas into Long Island to address the banking concerns of the business community, the elderly, and Long Islanders in general. Not having a bank in Long Island also poses a danger, because it means that government agencies would have far too much cash on hand. Persons who live on the island, the same. And it could also, increase the likelihood of criminal acts happening on the island. Mr. Speaker, I believe in family island development. The future, and this is something I said on the campaign trail many times, and drafted a plan. The future of the Bahamas is in the family islands. We must broaden the designation of economic zones, Prime Minister, so that Long Island, which badly needs an economic boost, is given economic stimulation, training and capacity opportunities, tax breaks and incentives, so people could come home and or want to invest in Long Island. And so I encourage our government to extend some of those economic incentives that we see in those zoned areas, Baintown and Grantstown, to islands like Long Island. So I'll help you in the city anytime, once you help me in Long Island. We're working on that too. You see, but see, development of Long Island, there's so many, Long Island has suffered degradation for so long. But there's so many prongs that we must take into account to respect the Long Island's development. And economic incentives is one. Mr. Speaker, we are also in need of a vehicle for our social worker in Long Island. And I reiterate the urgent need for a vehicle to be provided. Long Island is an island 80+ miles long, and one social worker. And the vehicle broke down a few months ago, parked alongside the road, and that was it. So it's absolutely imperative and important that we get a vehicle for social services in Long Island. Seabreeze. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member for Elizabeth, who came down recently and addressed the constituents of Long Island. You know, we have a few clinics there and quite a bit of health concerns. And so he came to Long Island and addressed the circumstances concerning the clinics, ambulances, medicine, staffing, and my constituency office secretary took detailed notes. Elizabeth, I'll send you those notes in short order. And so I thank you, Elizabeth, for coming down and addressing them. Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, I note here that we also have issues with respect to the mail boat in South Long Island, comes into Clarenstown, and also with respect to road traffic, staffing issues in terms of being short staff, matters concerning the printing of licenses. We need ink for the machine, and of course, the opening of an office for road traffic in North Long Island. A building has been identified in North Long Island, in Deals, Long Island, and I believe that there would have been some talks concerning establishing those offices in North Long Island. It's an inconvenience when persons have to drive all the way to one end or the other on particular days, or are not afforded the opportunity that one side might have. So I've always said, given my background, being from both the South and the North, I'm Long Island through and through. And so I'd like to see Long Island move from strength to strength, from end to end. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exumas and Ragged Island.
As many, Mr. Speaker, with respect to budget presentation, I wish I would be able to access the podium. No, thanks.
After the first inspection, then we speak, and then we go to the. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Just a moment. On.
Chair recognizes the member for Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy. I rise again on behalf of the great people of Exuma, the Exuma Keys, and Ragged Island today to contribute to the government's mid-year budget for 2017-2018. Mr. Speaker, it's been about 10 months now since the first budget debate, and I truly wanted to give this administration a chance. But not much has changed since my first doubts. And I have no confidence in this government's ability to manage public finances in a forward-looking way. I have no confidence in this government's ability to grow the economy. I have no confidence in this government's ability to execute a feasible economic plan on behalf of the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, the member for Long Island auditioned nicely for the Cabinet of the Bahamas, and I hope that the Prime Minister was watching and should consider him appropriately for promotion, Mr. Prime Minister. There's been pretty much no improvement in how I felt 10 months ago, and nothing has changed since 2 weeks ago when I said the mid-year budget communication is simply voodoo economics. A patchwork of sleight of hand accounting, politically motivated to distract from an underlying, underwhelming ocean of nothingness that this administration has so far offered the Bahamian people. If you couldn't tell by now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not particularly impressed with the mid-year budget communications, and I'm going to tell you why. But before I do that, Mr. Deputy, please allow me to expound on an issue of grave national importance that has gripped national attention just through the absurdity and the sloppy amateur hour sideshow antics that surrounded it. We're talking about Oban Energy saga, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, the member for Kalani, has embarrassed the Bahamian people by parading a convicted criminal in front of the world as a partner with the Bahamas government in some purported multi-billion-dollar oil storage and refinery project, all for the sake of a few hundred jobs that may or may not materialize over a few years. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians from all walks of life, and I'm not exaggerating here, are now seriously asking if the Bahamas government itself is engaged in something untoward on the Bahamian people. They're wondering if we are selling our reputation for a bowl of porridge, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, March 1st, 2018, the member for Kalani tabled a document that he said was the heads of agreement for the $5.5 billion deal the government signed with Oban Energies just 2 weeks ago. Surely you would remember that grand announcement, Mr. Deputy. You were in the chair. The Prime Minister announced that the signing of the agreement for the deal will be done, and he made this big announcement on the very day we debated a no-confidence motion in the Speaker. Ever since, it played out in the press. It played out in the press in a very ugly manner, Mr. Deputy. It's been like amateur night at the Apollo, Mr. Deputy. And sure enough, a few days later, on February 19th, the government signed a heads of agreement with one Peter Krieger, an American man convicted of fraud, involved in a multi-million-dollar scheme and shrouded in controversy even with the defunct CL Financial of Trinidad and a sister company of Clico, a company that saw the fortunes of so many hard-working Bahamians dashed. A criminal, Mr. Speaker, a convicted criminal. It's who the government paraded before the country, photographed and videoed and live streamed to the world as our partner in a multi-billion-dollar venture. And you know, just this morning, my friend, the member from East Grand Bahama, said that he will bring development to Grand Bahama by any means necessary. I know he didn't mean it that way, Mr. Deputy. But I am very concerned. But I am very concerned that after all of the controversy surrounding this matter, he would make such a statement. The Prime Minister said last week in this place that corruption is the #1 problem in our country, Yet there he sat right next to a presumably corrupt individual whose name would later become synonymous with our shame. Of course, the government didn't say one word about Mr. Krieger when he sat next to the Prime Minister, the people's Prime Minister, and amongst the National Economic Council, made up of several honorable members of this House. It was the media, Mr. Speaker, who unearthed these revelations about Peter Krieger and got him on record admitting to his corrupt past. Some of it, anyway. Much more came long after. According to the media reports, Mr. Krieger said he was not an official part of Oban, that he had no shares, no management role, and made no decisions. What then, Mr. Speaker, was he doing sitting next to the people's Prime Minister, signing a multi-billion-dollar heads of agreement with pen in his hand if he was only an ambassador for the project, as he told the media? In days that would come, Mr. Speaker, not only did the investigative journalists expose Mr. Krieger's past, but they got the Prime Minister, the member for Kalani, on video admitting that he knew of Mr. Krieger's criminal past, admitting that the government knew, yet he told the Bahamian people nothing about Mr. Krieger's dark past or his involvement with the company. Then, Mr. Speaker, comes again the member for Kalani to table the heads of agreement, though he indicated he would table the one we were all led to believe was signed by Mr. Krieger because we saw him on video signing. Instead, he tabled something purportedly signed by one Satpal Duna, the would-be president of Oban Energies. Of course, we have never seen Satpal Duna. We do not know when he might have signed these heads of agreement, though if the heads of agreement tabled in this place is accurate, it was signed on February 19th, the same day Krieger signed the other agreement. So I'm trying to put it all together, Mr. Deputy. I'm trying to put it together myself, but there appears to be now two Oban Energy heads of agreement. One that Peter Krieger signed, and one that Satpal Duna signed. That is, of course, Mr. Speaker, an assumption on my part, and the government must speak to this issue. As the Nassau Guardian has revealed, the heads of agreement he signed while sitting next to the member for Kalani, but rather signed the name of Satpal Duna. This is incredible, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Speaker, we are to believe that though Krieger signed that document in the name of someone else, again, something the side opposite never disclosed, the document that the member for Kalani tabled was truly signed by someone we have never seen. And given all the confusion surrounding this project in the past few weeks, I simply find this all hard to believe. Mr. Deputy, though we have not seen Satpal Duna, we have a raft of reading material about him that have been presented in the media, which have yet to be disputed. However, in the Prime Minister's communication to Parliament, I believe on February 14, he said, Oban Energy's management team has been involved in large energy infrastructure projects around the world and brings over 30 years of large, complex construction experience. Well, the Tribune newspaper said that Mr. Duna was fired from a company called Credit Sight for gross misconduct. Credit Sight is a research firm, a credit research firm, not an oil company. The newspaper also reported that Duna was fired as a used car salesman, Mr. Deputy.
Oh my Lord, not the used car salesman.
Now clearly, if he wasn't any good at selling used cars, Mr. Deputy, Oban thought we should now promote him as the big man who will operate this $5 billion oil refinery company on our tranquil shores in East Grand Bahama. Mr. Speaker, I have a few more questions about the Oban deal. Where is the agreement signed by Mr. Krieger on February 19th, and why was that document not tabled in this House? Did Mr. Satpal Duna ever visit the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, and if so, when? How did he get here, and on which island did he clear immigration? Curiously, Mr. Speaker, in an ad that ran in the papers yesterday, Duna said he is now on the ground here in the Bahamas. But where, Mr. Speaker? We want to see the man responsible for this purported $5 billion affair. We saw the full page yesterday. He can write flowery language about what we perceive to be fact or fiction, and the entire fishiness surrounding this deal, yet he can't be bothered to show up for a press conference or a photo op with the People's Time Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, what manner of man is this? What are we to make of this? What does it say about him, our partner? $5 billion, East Grand Bahama, oil refinery. How and when did Satpal Duna sign the document the Prime Minister tabled in the House? If it was on February 19th, why was he not at the press conference to sign his own name when Peter Krieger reportedly signed Satpal Duna as his signature? Will the government say when the Oban Heads of Agreement table on March 1st was signed? And has Oban Energies as yet produced proof that it indeed has the funds for this project? I do believe that at that press conference, they said proof of funding will be coming in a few days. Well, it's 16 days and counting, Mr. Deputy. I want them to show me the money. 16 days and counting. Oban wrote in yesterday's papers that the deal will grow the country's gross domestic product by over 10% per annum, Mr. Speaker. This, of course, makes very little financial connect for me. And maybe they should have consulted their accountants on this issue, Mr. Deputy. Our economy has never grown by that much in a single year, not even with Atlantis or Bahama. This claim raises more concern about the wherewithal of Oban Energies. This company that is exempt from the import duties, exempt from VAT and export duties, stamp tax, real property tax, for 90 years, Mr. Deputy. 90 years. Plus they get thousands of acres of crown land, is my understanding. It is expected to produce.
Just
on a point.
Yeah, just to
recognizes East Grand Bahama.
Just to clarify one point, because I am aware of that one point, and that is the lease, as I understand it, is for 45 years, with an option for 45 years. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for the member to be transparent with respect to the tax exemptions that are included in that agreement. And that is that those exemptions mirror what is available in the Hawkesbury Creek area, and they mirror the incentives that were granted under the East and West Grand Bahama Incentive Act that his government would have passed. And in respect to value-added tax, it is in respect to export, which is exempt under value-added tax legislation. So I think you ought to be, let's not be disingenuous with that.
First, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy. Firstly, the heads of agreement speaks for itself. And I am quoting from the heads of agreement, right? And if the minister who spoke for 2 hours today wished to provide some explanation as to how this tied into the tax regime in Grand Bahama, he had 2 hours this morning. But I'm quoting from the heads of agreement right now. And I'm quoting what the tax exemptions are in the heads of agreement. And, Mr. Speaker, it does say 45 plus the option to renew for another 45.
That's 90.
And in Accounting 101, Mr. Deputy, 45 plus 45 can only be 90. And I said, Mr. Speaker, 45 plus 45 is 90 under any language, Mr. Speaker. And I hope my time is preserved, Mr. Speaker, because I have a lot to say.
Go on, man.
It is expected to produce 600 jobs over the next 6 years, with the addition of 250 jobs over the next 12 years. And they say they're going to grow the economy much, much better than Atlantis did, Mr. Deputy. This member wants to see the calculation of that. Let me be clear, Mr. Deputy. I am pro-business. I am pro-investment. And heaven knows the people of Grand Bahama need a break.
Thank you.
But I wonder, Mr. Speaker. I don't know about this one. I've been to East Grand Bahama. The people are lovely in East Grand Bahama. They invited me back. They tell me come back over and over again. I will return. It's a beautiful place. And I hope for more activity for the people of Grand Bahama generally. But I don't know if this is the one, Mr. Deputy. And I wonder whether we have given too much for a bowl of porridge. According to the agreement, the government shall not have the right to terminate these heads of agreement based upon any environmental assessment report, but instead shall work with the developers to mitigate any concerns. How incredible. How incredible. If we can't get the signing right, how are we going to execute a $5 billion project? And how are we going to work through these concerns with the developer? The urban developers have the right to abandon the project if they so wish, whenever it wishes. It also has the right, I believe, to sell the project to another party and transfer the concessions. Is this really a gamble that we should be taking on with our environment, Mr. Deputy? It is the most serious question to which I have yet to see any suitable answer from anyone on the other side. In any event, Mr. Speaker, I don't expect much clarity on this to come from the side opposite. They've clammed up on this lately. They haven't mentioned Oban one time today. Maybe they're still trying to convince us that we're seeing holograms. But let me see if I get this right. People of checkered characters gets concessions to build an oil refinery and don't have to have a satisfactory environmental impact assessment in the Bahamas. Yeah. Our pristine Bahamas. In East Grand Bahama, where I understand there are many wildlife sanctuaries. If it happens that the EIA says this is dangerous for the environment, the government cannot stop them. Absolutely incredible, Mr. Deputy. Well, we will wait to see what the environmental laws permit this government to do. But what I find most troubling, if all of that wasn't troubling, what I find most troubling, Mr. Deputy, in clause 5.4 of the heads of agreement, if something goes wrong, let's say there's a massive oil spill, the maximum penalty is $3.5 million. So if it takes 5 million or 10 million or 20 million or 50 million, Oban's only responsible for 3.5 million. And I didn't see any mandatory requirement for environmental insurance either. Something smells about this deal, Mr. Deputy, and it ain't oil. Maybe they think bringing up contracts signed under the previous administration with 3-year exit clauses will lead the public to forget the government's solemn duty to operate above board and protect the interests of the country and the Bahamian people. As quickly as those elected were elected, they seem to have forgotten. But we don't have the luxury of discarding our responsibilities, Mr. Speaker. Some of us must hold firm to the standards we espouse before coming to this place. Unlike some of those on the opposite side, particularly the member for Kalani, who in opposition blasted sweetheart deals perhaps right from this seat, now signs one faster than a proper environmental impact assessment allows. This is simply incredible, Mr. Deputy. The same member who in this very place before the last general election raged against a government having anything to do with those accused of fraud, yet sits next to an admitted fraudster who signed somebody else's name to document while the entire affair is broadcast to the world. It's absolutely incredible, Mr. Deputy. Absolutely incredible. Some of us, Mr. Speaker, actually have a care what we say, and we consider the ramifications of promises we make before abandoning them for no other apparent reason than that the day is different. Mr. Speaker, you may or may not know that my leader, the member for Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador, has pledged to call for a select committee to look into this Oban matter if the government does not at least table the, quote, ceremonial heads of agreement that Krieger signed. And I fully support that, Mr. Deputy. Before it comes to that, though, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, in my view, must find a way to extricate the Bahamian people from this relationship that started very badly. It started on the rocks, Mr. Deputy. It's complicated, but it ain't too late to get out, you know, Mr. Deputy. It ain't too late. I had a friend from Cat Island. He told me they used to run around with donkeys as a child, and they would hold on the tail as the donkey ran, and the donkey would run and they would keep up with the donkey, but they always knew when that donkey was about to go crazy, and they knew when to let go. The moral of the story is, when you got the tail of a donkey, know when to let it go, Mr. Deputy. It ain't too late to let it go. That being said, if the route of a select committee is not successful in getting full transparency for the Bahamian people, we will have to probe this sordid affair through the Public Accounts Committee, of which I am a member. We will call people, and we will call for papers. We will call members of the government service, the civil service, and we will have them speak to these issues of who signed what and when. And I have great confidence in the public service, and they will come here and they will speak truth to the Oban energy affair. Mr. Deputy, something smells. Something smells about this deal, Mr. Deputy, and it surely ain't oil. Mr. Speaker, let me turn back to the budget communication for a minute. Again, there is no real vision here, no real plan, and no real strategy. Unless that vision, plan, and strategy is to present some manufactured picture of robust financial situation. But even if that is what has been achieved, the government's own details and an inescapable narrative that surrounds the government performance indicates how flat the economic situation is and how this administration has no real grasp of what to do when out of power, and even less of a clue what to do while in power.
except complain about the PLP and the bills that they left. Well, we've heard that now once a month for 10 months. And we're still hearing about these bills. Well, news flash. This is what happens. This is what happens at the end of an administration cycle. One administration undertakes commitments for the next to pay. This is the role of continuous government. This is what happens when you have a cash accounting system, like the minister finally admitted. You pay the bills as they come. Mr. Speaker, I would venture to say that the current administration is still paying for commitments undertaken during the last Ingram administration, let alone the last Christie administration, just as the next PLP administration in 2022 will have to pay for all the debts of restructuring that you're entering into, and additional borrowing this government is undertaking, and commitments they make. We will have to pay those bills, Mr. Deputy, because government is continuous. The difference is the PLP left you with a means to pay those bills. The PLP left the Department of Inland Revenue. They left an incredibly well-run VAT regime, a new regulated gaming industry with tax revenue. They left Bahama on the point, and we left the other projects in the pipeline too, which will benefit the Bahamian people only if this government does its due diligence to advance them out of the pipeline. And let's not forget the restructured, automated road traffic department system. A little less whining about paying the commitments of the country, and a little more creativity in actually growing the economy and facilitating job creation may put this belly aching to rest by this government. Mr. Deputy, the Minister of Finance boasts of economic growth of 1.8% for 2017 fiscal year. This is wonderful news, Mr. Deputy. However, what he won't tell you is that it's attributable to the PLP. Let's think about this for a moment. What has the F&M done since coming to office to grow this economy? Well, Mr. Speaker, it certainly wasn't the Commercial Enterprises Act. It wasn't anything that's happened in Grand Bahama. It surely wasn't the borrowing more than the $800 million or eliminating thousands of jobs from the civil service. I can tell you that it was led by Bahama, mainly Bahama. The same Bahama that the Prime Minister and his deputy said had a fake opening. The same Bahama he promised to sell. The same Bahama whose Chinese owners, the member for Freetown, said were not to be trusted when the Christie administration struck the deal. Mind you, Mr. Deputy, mind you, the member for Freetown is now Bahama's best friend. He can't talk with it enough. It's his pride and joy these days. He just started in the paper yesterday. He was in the paper yesterday, raving and gushing about it. Mr. Speaker,
Raving and ranting.
he now says he is thrilled about it. And it's wonderful. And how beautiful it is that it's creating jobs, thousands of jobs for the Bahamian people. So yes, kudos, the economy grew. But let's be honest about why. Especially when the DPM said the cupboard was bare. On the health of the numbers, Mr. Speaker, overall expenses are way up. About 1.79 billion so far this year compared to 1.35 billion in the same period last fiscal year.
This, according to the Minister of Finance, is mainly due to debt redemption in the amount of $787 million. I'm okay with the explanation. Up from $247 million in the previous year period. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the debt reduction amount in the period July to December of $787 million is nearly double the entire debt reduction amount of $432 million in the previous year. That's from your book. Being so eager, though, to paint a pretty picture, he neglected to say how much of the expenses and the shortfall in revenue in prior years related to the two most devastating catastrophic hurricanes. He failed to tell the whole story. As for revenues, Mr. Deputy, while that is up by 19 million, it should really be more, shouldn't it? Given the scale down on capital infrastructure spending, the sending home of thousands of government employees, the reneging on promises to eliminate categories of value-added tax, and only one hurricane with a minimal impact on the archipelago, these numbers really should be more robust. And then there's the other side, Mr. Speaker. If, as the Minister of Finance said in this place last May, that the cupboards were bare, then surely the situation should have been much worse. It's hard work following the inconsistencies. It's hard work following the inconsistencies of the Minister of Finance, Mr. Deputy. Just a few months ago, the minister was saying VAT revenue was down. Now he's saying VAT revenues are up. Now he's acting like he anticipated that this should happen. On January 19th, to be precise, this minister was quoted as saying VAT revenues are down. I will lay the paper. When I'm done, I'll lay the paper, Mister. I'll lay it. I'll lay it, Mr. Deputy.
Yield. Yield. The point of order, East Grand Bahama.
I got everything, Mr. Deputy.
What's the point of order? What is it?
You should quote directly from it, and then he should prove that those were my words.
I'm not sure you recognize it.
Mr. Speaker.
I recognize East Grand Bahama.
Yeah, okay. I'm finished.
Deputy, what I'm saying.
Exuma, one second, Exuma and Ragged Island. You were quoting the member for East Grand Bahama.
Let me just.
I'm asking a question, Exuma. Are you gonna table
yes,
the
my presentation?
You're accepting.
Yes, Mr. Deputy. On about January 19th, Mr.
Yes,
Deputy.
Just 1 second, East Grand Bahama.
Deputy.
1 second. For the record, Exuma, you were giving some quotes.
Yes.
Can you refer to those quotes, the paper again, so that when you table, I would know what you're tabling?
On January 19th, Mr. Speaker. On January 19th.
Yes. Can I before you finish? Do you have the document, the table?
I think I have it here, Mr.
Can you at least show the table? I understand. I understand the practice where members, Mr. One second, Exuma, 1 second. I understand the practice where persons make quotes from papers and then they table afterwards.
Yes, Mr.
And I understand, and I can accept that because I think all of us here are honorable. But at least, can you state the date, the paper, and at least you could show the chair. Hold on. You could show the chair, the paper, so that when it comes to this table, I'll be able to.
Mr. Deputy, you would have heard me say earlier.
Yes.
That it was January 19th. The minister was quoted as saying, VAT revenues are down. VAT revenues are down. VAT revenues are down. Mr.
Well, I'm going to allow you to finish, but I want to see the paper. Which, if you're going to quote the paper, and if you say that you're going to lay the paper, either you're going to withdraw it.
I'll withdraw it.
Withdraw it then.
I'll withdraw it, and I'll move on for now.
Yes. Then you'll do it.
And I will find it. But one day you don't say VAT revenue down, and the next day you say VAT revenue up, right?
I remember the article well. That's why I tell you to read it.
And now he is saying. And he said it was because a sluggish economy or something to that effect, Mr. I don't want to get sidetracked with this. I got a lot to say. But he took a view that he knew this all along and he expected this. With regard to overall revenues, Mr. Speaker, I cannot be the only person who noticed on page 11 of the booklet the proceeds from borrowing for the period July to December for fiscal year 2018, 2017, has exceeded the same period for 2016-2017 by $1 billion. I promise you I'm not making this up. Where $399 million was borrowed in the first 6 months of the previous fiscal year by the last administration, this government has, according to this mid-year budget tabled in this House, borrowed more than $1.4 billion in the first 6 months of this fiscal year. And it's right here on page 11. Page 11 of this book, Mr. Deputy, the one with the pretty pictures. It demonstrates, and the minister did speak to it. And he had 2 hours. He had 2 hours. But it's on page 11 of the book with the pretty pictures. If anyone wishes to challenge it, Mr. Deputy, or better explain why the minister and the ministry insisted was not exceeding borrowing of just over $800 million. Well, he had 2 hours. He offered an explanation. This is nearly doubled, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy, if the member would allow me to get to my point, rather than heckling from his chair. You know, when he spoke, he called Exuma maybe 10 times. Some of it wasn't you know, the kind of stuff we like to hear in this House, but I allowed him to finish. I asked for the same courtesy. He had 2 hours. This is nearly double, Mr. Speaker. The approved forecast of the $755 million of proceeds from borrowing approved by this Parliament doubled. He says it's financial restructuring. And that's fine. I think this is something, though, the Public Accounts Committee would like to examine as well. Why the glossing over some important numbers when the Bahamian people have a right to full disclosure directly from the minister? This does not include the new borrowing of the $190 million for Bank of the Bahamas bailout money, and the IDB loan of $90 million they claim doesn't impact borrowing this fiscal year. But it really is sad how they treat the Bahamian people, you know, Mr. Deputy. Less than 1 year, more than $1.4 billion borrowed, some of it restructuring, according to the minister. And what do the Bahamian people have to show for it? Bad roads, failing infrastructure, and a busted healthcare system. Surely, Mr. Deputy, sometime before the next general election will be the people's time. Just no time soon. It doesn't add up. More borrowing, Mr. Speaker, yet thousands sent home. And even that plan, their only plan, seemed to have been an abject failure. Because whilst they've laid off, they continue to hire. Right. We must run an audit on this. This is what we need a forensic audit on. So we are reducing staff count to save money, but we're hiring. We're hiring like the sailor that they mentioned earlier. No disrespect to sailors. More borrowing, Mr. Speaker. Thousands sent home while overall spending is down, payroll is up. The AG says, a member of the other place, he says that the government saved or would save $75 million with all the people they were going to send home. Yet now salaries up $15 million. The minister calls this a result of union payment and other things that were due. Again, I call it having no plan. It just don't add up, Mr. Deputy. And then failing at the plan they tried to cobble together when they tried to make financial sense of the bad political policy decisions. I guess they'll say this is part of paying off the bills the PLP left as well. Last year, he said it was hundreds of millions of dollars that the PLP left. In this budget communication, he said it's tens of millions of dollars. Today, he said it's, I forgot what he called it today, but it's changing, Mr. Speaker, and it simply don't add up. I wonder when this administration will start taking ownership for its government. Speaking of bills, what about the bills they don't pay, Mr. Speaker? those that have nothing to do with the PLP, nothing to do with what the PLP left, those basic maintenance bills that have been neglected. Why starve the economy to make the numbers look pretty, Mr. Speaker? This is just terribly bad business. Why not grow the economy? Why not inspire confidence to improve revenues? What does it matter if the books look pretty, but the people are hurting? It's like owning a farm. It's like owning a farm, Mr. Deputy, and having a beautiful green meadow. But your cattle going hungry. The grass look greener, but the cattle are starving. What's the point? Is government not here to make sure the people get the best benefit from their tax dollars? According to this budget, the grass is green in Exuma too, but the lunch vendors can't get paid. According to this budget, the grass is green in Exuma, but the roads can't get paved. The grass is green in Abaco too, but the power company is on the blink. According to the budget, the grass is green in Auckland, yet the poor people and the government empowerment program can't get paid. I want the people of the Bahamas to take note, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Finance has bragged and bragged and bragged that the government deliberately withheld the capital budget, and for no logical reason. When public restrooms are broken, remember he boasted. When public parks are in disrepair, remember he boasted. When your car axle is snapped, hitting one of these gigantic potholes enough to have struck the water table, remember he boasted. When in Cat Island, they put a body of one of our loved ones in a bathtub, when we don't have sufficient beds at Princess Margaret Hospital, remember he boasted. A reasonable question would be, what are they waiting for, Mr. Speaker? What's the imaginary marker that tells them now is a good time to get to work and start taking care of business? What's that imaginary marker when they say now is a good time to get to work and start taking care of the Bahamian people? Was an arbitrary mid-year budget statement worth the suffering of the people? I suppose they congratulate themselves, Mr. Speaker, that they spent $15 million less in public works. But Lord knows it shows. The people can see where the savings are. I doubt the people are pleased. $32 million less was spent on health care in the first half of the fiscal year, Mr. Speaker. Was there's a crisis at the hospital, no less? It surely shows there. Environment spent $4.3 million less than last year, and of course the dump burned again, inflicting untold health risk on residents of New Providence and even more untold damage on our tourism product. Ministry of Grand Bahama spent $650,000 less than last year, while those who didn't get assistance after hurricane still get wet when it rains. Ministry of Transport and Local Government, Ministry of Transport and Local Government spent $2.5 million less than last year, whilst a potentially environmentally damaging derelict barge sits on the rocks at Long Island and Family Island. Local government scraps to pay for garbage collection. In Black Point too, Garden Hills. This happens in Black Point too. They're scrapping to collect the garbage, Garden Hills. Now, Mr. Deputy, and with respect to Moody's, I hear the grand communication of the Minister of Finance, but he surely ain't impressing Moody's. They don't believe a word the government says.
Wonder why?
They don't believe,
Wonder why?
at least Moody's doesn't believe, and is not impressed with all this talk about cash versus accrual and all this talk about old PLP bills. They're not impressed by it. Because after demonizing the PLP to make yourselves look good, Moody doesn't believe the government will hit its target deficits. Moody doesn't believe the Department of Statistics.
But he didn't downgrade it.
They don't believe the GDP revision numbers.
But he didn't downgrade it. Right?
Moody doesn't really believe your plan to reduce public sector
But he didn't downgrade it.
staff numbers. and you fall all over yourself trying to impress Moody's. And Moody's didn't blink an eye when it just said a few days ago that it will still downgrade to junk if every single onerous mark isn't met. Dry eye, they call it, Mr. Deputy. Dry eye. That's what Moody was. Frankly, I found their assessment insulting. Moody's. I felt badly for my colleagues on the other side. I felt badly for my friend from East Grand Bahama, because I really believe his heart is in the right place. But I felt even more badly for the good professionals in government, the Department of Statistics, who have to live with the bad decisions of this government, as the foreign rating agencies has the sword of Damocles hanging over their every action. Perhaps the government should take a page from the PLP. How we stood up the RBC after one of their executives insulted Bahamian professionals. I didn't take it very kindly that Moody's didn't believe the Minister of Finance. I didn't take it very kindly that Moody's didn't believe our Department of Statistics. I didn't take it very kindly. The minister should demand they clear it up. And what the reason is why they doubt the government so much, I'm sure the Bahamian people would be keenly interested in knowing. But, Mr. Speaker, after our own government has talked down our economy over and over again, so consistently, and our Prime Minister has branded us a corrupt country and told the Haitian people that we must endure more pain, maybe Moody's just figures that's how this administration views the Bahamas, and it's okay to talk down to us. If you talk down your economy, if you talk down your country, if you call your Bahamian people corrupt every chance you get, how you expect the international community to believe you? I felt badly for East Grand Bahama when Moody said they didn't believe him. I felt badly for the professional Department of Statistics when they say they didn't believe them. But I can wrap up now, Mr. Deputy. Mr. Deputy,
on a point of,
let me point out.
Exuma, he's standing on a point of order. The point of order,
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I believe that the member in his exuberance is really maybe overreaching and misleading. Because nowhere in Moody's reports did it say that they do not believe the government. Now, they may have made an assessment or some statements, but they didn't say anywhere in those reports that they did not believe the government. And I think it is dangerous, Mr. Speaker, for the member to put those words in the mouth, so to speak, of Moody's, and to the extent that you're really
Stand up for you, man.
You're questioning them now. You're putting words in their mouth. They did not say any of those words that he said, and he should really withdraw it, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, because that's really unfair to them, in as much as it is unfair to me. But, Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is, and the member asked the question about why they don't believe the government.
There's a speech.
I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, 5 years. 5 years, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy.
And you know, I don't want to tell him what they had to say.
One second.
Minister had 2 hours. Mr.
I went on a bond road show. I don't want to tell him what the bondholders had to say, Mr. Speaker. So I just stand on the point that the member really ought to withdraw those comments with respect to Moody's not believing the government or Moody's not believing the Department of Statistics, because that is untrue.
I withdraw that reference.
You withdrawing the reference,
Yeah,
Zuma and
but-
Ragged Island?
But yes, Mr. Deputy, but let me,
And you're referring to the newspaper again?
and I will lay this on the table right now. I will show it to you right now, Mr.
Yeah.
Right now.
You're adopting,
I'm adopting
you're
it.
adopting it as
I'm
per
adopting it. Yes, Mr. Deputy.
Order 33. Yeah.
And I will lay
One.
this, now, Mr. Deputy. You don't need to wait. The Nassau Guardian, February 27th, and the February 26th version of the Tribune both speaks to Moody's comments that the government will miss the deficit targets. Government will miss the deficit target. Chester Abbas reported in Nassau Guardian. Neil Hartnell reported in the Tribune. And when they talk nicely about the Minister of Finance, he don't object. But now Moody's is saying the government will miss its deficit targets, notwithstanding what the minister says. So you make your own determination as to whether they believe what the minister said or not. I'm going to lay this on the table, Mr. Deputy. He can read it. He can read it for himself.
Order the,
I'd much prefer to continue on.
let's
with
get the documents first.
The rest of my
order that the
presentation.
documents you brought up.
You're a fair deputy, so I know you're protecting my time, Mr. Deputy.
Order that the documents do, Leon.
I'm about to wrap up. I know that the minister will read those at his leisure. But I want to wrap up here, Mr. Speaker. I want to point out, when it comes to my country, I love my Bahamas. When it comes to our country, I love our country. As I said to Nord Abaco at our last sitting, you will never ever find me talking down our economy. You will not find me talking down our country. And, you know, Mr. Minister East Grand Bahama, we exchange words from time to time, but I ain't gonna let them talk bad with you either. Because you represent the Bahamas that we love. And therefore, we must stop the talking down. We must stop the talking down. Stop talking down our country. Stop calling the Bahamian people corrupt. Stop talking down our economy. We got a country to build. Let's get on with it. That's my message today, Mr. Deputy. But I want to wrap up. And let me point out, Mr. Deputy, that the Bahamian people are not at all impressed by the bantering between the PLP and the FNM. They want progress. They want things they could touch, see, and feel. They want progress for the Bahamas, and they expect us to deliver. The way out of this quagmire is simple. 2 words: economic growth. And you can only fire so many people before service starts to suffer irreversibly. You can only tax people so much until the burden becomes too much for them to bear, and jobs and livelihoods are impacted. You can only cut so much without strangling the economy. So economic growth is the key. I would say to the government, as I said during the budget debate, that an economic czar, as I suggested in my first budget presentation, is still needed to bring focus to this issue, to marshal the best ideas and the best talent from the private sector to move our country forward. There's still foreign direct investment in pipeline that we must get out, Mr. Speaker, with good due diligence. Don't do it like we're trying to do, Oban, for goodness sake. But we can move with more dispatch. A good start would be to meet with those investors, Mr. Deputy, and encourage them to expedite their affairs. We must also unlock and mobilize domestic investments. This administration knows a lot of local moneyed people, Mr. Deputy. It's time to start encouraging the unlocking of domestic investments in our economy so that this can be sustainable, driven by the Bahamas, for the Bahamas. Also, Mr. Speaker, I honestly think it's time we seriously consider a medical marijuana industry in the Bahamas. I don't personally buy into the fear-mongering over medical marijuana and the anxiety about what our neighbors to the north might say. I know my leader supports medical marijuana as well. I don't have the news clip. I would lay it on the table too. But we agree on this issue. Let me be very clear. Let me be very clear so that there's no political mischief. I am talking about medical marijuana. They're doing it already in Jamaica. They got 12 growers. They're exporting to Canada. If we look at the adverse sociological, financial, and health impacts that alcohol has on our country, while we play twiddly-do with our thumbs, as other countries monetize this industry, I don't understand why we're not exploring it, a model where there could be lucrative taxes. You know, I agree with the Minister of Health when he talks about more research of the potential social impact of decriminalizing. That's not what I'm supporting today. I'm supporting medical marijuana. We can continue the studies, but there is a great international body of work on the subject. But let's put in place the regulatory framework and make this phase one. Harvesting for medicinal exports. Why sit and twiddle our thumbs whilst the USA, Jamaica, Canada, they're getting on with it? And we say they're talking about saving a couple dollars by slashing payments from the civil service. We got to expand and grow our economy. We have to be creative. And if this isn't something you want to do, we got more ideas too. Next, I hear the minister talked about streamlining the business license process. And, you know, kudos. I want to see the execution now. I look forward to the execution of the streamlined business process. But the small business initiatives must get off the ground. We've been hearing a lot of talk about it. But I believe we're waiting for an arbitrary timeline so that we can make this administration look good. But we need to just get on with it and do it now. Growing small business drives Bahamian empowerment, and it drives employment, and it drives our economy. You're killing two birds with one stone when you do this. And also you put more focus on tackling structural unemployment in the Bahamas. Launching programs swiftly to mobilize discouraged workers, additional training, self-start initiative, cottage industries that plug into tourism, and home-based business. The minister talked about home-based businesses, low-hanging fruit. I'd like to see initiatives roll out and not wait on some arbitrary timeline. The Citizen Security Initiative is actually a pretty good example of this. We can do more to get that going and then replicate it. Agribusiness is another way to get the economy going. Aggressively pursue food security right here at home. Bomsey, absolutely brilliant. It's a good start. Wrap it up. Put more focus on it. Expand it to other islands. Perhaps Bomsey for livestock farming might be located in Ragged Island, for example, or even Long Island. Maybe the farmers will stop chasing you a little bit if you do this. We must focus on government business development, spending in revenue-generating sectors, like using Bahamas Air to bring more tourists into the Bahamas. The resorts in Exuma, still talking about needing more airlift. let's see if we can invest more in the productive sectors of our economy. And then we must help smaller commuter airlines to get reliable crafts to service the family islands. Doesn't take much to create an airline hub in Exuma, creating jobs, opportunity, and industry. I know some good small, mid-sized commuter airlines that could benefit from this, like Sky Bahamas. We can easily make Exuma, and I say this in all sincerity. I say this in all sincerity, East Grand Bahama. We can create industry. We can create jobs. We can use Bahamas Air efficiently to bring more tourists from the USA and elsewhere to our shores. It's called investing in the productive sector. Then we should put more money in local government. Take this stranglehold of Nassau central government off the necks of local council and let them soar. Black Point, in Staniel Key, in mainland Exuma, all across the islands of the Bahamas. These local councillors love their islands. And I heard the member from Southern Shores during the budget debate talked about giving a percentage of the revenues collected in the islands back to the islands. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it's a brilliant idea. But we got to see it happen, because we're doing quite well, and we can do even better if we get more investments in the family islands. We got to send Andrews some money too, and all of the other islands of the Bahamas. We must explore the opportunities that might present themselves, maybe being a little bit more creative with new industries, harnessing our resources for the benefit of all Bahamians. Mr. Deputy, when we give away or when we lease our crown land for 45 plus 45 years, why don't we have an equity stake in the business? Equity, Mr. Deputy. Equity. That's how we can expand and grow our Bahamas with a revised and renewed sovereign wealth fund. If we're going to lease our land, our natural resource, for 45 plus 45 years, then we should have some equity. There's been a lot of talk, you know. There's been a lot of talk on the campaign trail. And I believe y'all might have forgotten about the sovereign wealth fund you promised. We are not. And I ask you to keep it in your focus. There's great opportunity to expand our Bahamas. Let's examine these new initiatives. Let's put in place some more bold initiative incentives under the Industries Encouragement Act, funding for entrepreneurs in solar and other renewable energies. We have some options, you know. We don't just have to sit around and talk month after month about how the PLP spend and how you now got to spend all your money to pay the PLP bills. We've heard that speech 10 times, once per month, over the last 10 months. We got options. It boils down to two words: economic growth. We should get on with it. And for the love of all that's holy, for the love of all that's holy, for the love of all that's holy, we really must develop a plan. Right now, I don't see the plan. It's embarrassing, to be honest. We got to stop blaming the PLP. The F&M has been in power for 15. The F&M has been in power for 15 of the last 25 years. And we sit around and we pretend that these problems that the country faced only started 5 years ago. They pretend like we just got national debt, like we had no national debt, and we only discovered national debt and borrowing in the last 5 years. How disingenuous.
Order.
How disingenuous. Let's stop blaming others. And let's stop blaming the last 5 years. Let's stop blaming the last 5 years. And let's take ownership. Let's press forward. Let's move our country forward. Let's revisit the National Development Plan. You don't just scrap it. A lot of work gone into this. by PLPs and FNMs and DNA, and you take office and you scrap it. How you expect to build a long-term sustainable country when we try to change these things every 5 years? We need non-partisan participation
Yield,
to
Exuma.
drive long-term growth of our economy, Mr. Deputy.
The chair recognizes the member.
Mr. Speaker.
South Beach.
Thank you.
You rise on.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
You rise on what point? What point?
Mr. Speaker, Exuma and Ragged Island is most impressive in its rhetorical exuberance. But, Mr. Speaker, he is misleading. At the heart of the agenda of education is the National Development Plan. At the heart of the agenda of this government's commitment is the National Development Plan.
I'm delighted to hear that.
So, Exuma.
Let me clarify. I know that
you made a statement that.
I'm speaking to it now, Mr.
Are you withdrawing it, and you clarify what you meant?
Allow me to finish, Mr. Deputy. I really want to clarify the point, and then I believe you'll be satisfied. I know that the good Minister for Education is very focused on education, and I know that his main reference was in relation to education. But I want to say, for all to hear, that we need to continue the National Development Plan across the board, for the economy, for education, for crime, for social development, for transportation reform. So let's not scrap good work that's gone into, let's not scrap work.
So, Exuma, 1 second, Exuma, are you going to withdraw the comment that the government was scrapping
if I said
yes.
government was scrapping it, they've clarified, I withdraw it. And I say I support the government pressing forward.
Very well, Exuma.
Mr. Deputy, I believe I have another minute.
You have another minute. You have another minute, Exuma.
2 minutes, Mr.
You have another minute, Exuma. You have another minute, Exuma.
Let me just say, Mr. Deputy, a word on Exuma before I sit. Exuma is having his best year ever on paper. We're contributing significantly to jobs, not just for Exumians, for Grand Bahamians, for Nasuvians, for Eleutherians, and for Androsians. We need more investment in infrastructure because we could do more, Mr. Deputy. As far as Ragged Island is concerned, I want you to pray for them. I ask for your prayers for Ragged Island because even though the grass is greener, there's still no school, still no police, still no administration building, still no nurse, and still no green plan. Mr. Deputy, I am always grateful for an opportunity to speak on behalf of the wonderful people who elected me to be here. The wonderful people of Exuma, Exuma Keys, and Ragged Island. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy.
Thank you, Exuma. As many. The chair recognizes the member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy.
1 second, North Abaco. Can you just yield?
No. I want to answer something. You're calling us corrupt. Well, you all will call me corrupt. I'm not letting.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for North Abaco.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't want to interrupt the member, who was, of course, in full flight and described by my brother aptly as being exuberant. I would describe it as animated exuberance. But the member asserted that we are all over the place calling Bahamians corrupt. You referred to North Abaco in particular in saying that we are calling Bahamians corrupt, right? I thought we cleared this up on yesterday when you did it, and we indicated to you that we speak to corruption in public service and in governance, and no foreign direct investor wants to invest in a country where there's ripe corruption. Correct. Remember, We speak directly to these foreign direct investors, you know, who wanted to invest in this country. And the stories that they tell, we don't repeat. But listen, you asserted too that we have some issue with patriotism because we speak truth. I would have you know, my friend, Exuma, I joined the Royal Bahamas Defense Force in 1981 as an 18-year-old boy. No one could be more patriotic than I. Risked my life for nearly 37 years in service of this Bahama land. And so I take exception to the fact that you would assert that we are unpatriotic on this side. I find that rather odious that you would do that and assert that we are unpatriotic as a Bahamian people who are fighting for the development of our country, who have fought and risked our lives, some of us, in service of this country.
Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Exuma, Margaret Island.
I'm not sure where the member for North Abaco heard me speaking when I said unpatriotic. That's not something I recall saying. What I did say, I wish to thank the member for North Abaco for his wonderful service to the country, Mr. Speaker, in all sincerity. What I did say was that this government says that the Bahamas is corrupt. The Prime Minister said that corruption is the #1 problem, #2 problem, and the #3 problem. And he agrees with that. And I say, as I've said in my budget presentation, we as leaders on your side and my side must be careful not to talk down our country. That's the point I made. And I believe that's very clear. So I cast no aspersions as to whether the member for North Abaco is patriotic or not. I would never go there. The fact that we are all here, we're presumably honorable, and we're giving of ourselves national service. I know the member for North Abaco isn't here for the salary either. So I regret that he believes that I was asserting that he or anyone else on the other side is unpatriotic. I repeat, we must not talk down our country.
The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marathon.
Thank you.
They tell us
They defend the indefensible. Marathon on the ground? Well, you better get marathon.
No, man, we good. He'll take care of that for me. He'll take care of that. Any luck?
Yeah?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, thank you for affording me this opportunity to speak on behalf of the constituency of Marathon, and to give my report to the nation on the mid-year activities of the Ministry of Environment and Housing. Mr. Speaker, Mr. David Attenborough remarked, Sir David, he was knighted probably because of these remarks in part. And it seems to me that the natural world is the greatest resource of excitement, the greatest source of visual beauty, the greatest source of intellectual interest. It is the greatest source of so much in life that makes life worth living. I wholeheartedly concur with these simple words, as the environment has always had something happening to capture our interests. Today, Mr. Speaker, is no exception. Before I give my formal report, Mr. Speaker, I feel compelled to advise this House of an agreement I uncovered in my ministry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the agreement is entitled Agreement Between the Authority and the Fund Administrator, dated the 8th of November, 2013. The authority is the Ministry of the Environment and Housing, and the administrator is named as HLB Galanis & Co. The agreement indicates the following. Number one, the minister responsible for housing, the National Insurance Board, and the minister responsible for finance have come together to collaborate as partners and to enter into an agreement in which the Ministry of Environment and Housing will be the lead partner and NIB will be a co-partner in this agreement. Two, the parties entered into an agreement for a bridge loan of up to $10 million, which was to be provided by NIB for funding the Bahamas National Housing Construction Program, Mr. Speaker, undertaken by the Ministry of Environment and Housing. Number three, the funds were to be provided over a period of 12 months in 4 separate disbursements of $2 million each, of $2.5 million each. Number 4, HLB Galanis & Co. was hired to manage the drawdown of the funds and protect the interests of the partners. HLB Galanis & Co. was expected to adhere to the scope of the works and other responsibilities given for proper management and delivery of the project. What is noteworthy is that the agreement refers to the Minister of Finance, but the Minister of Finance has not signed. Further, the agreement is noticeably signed by the former Minister of Environment and Housing as a corporation sole, and not the Permanent Secretary, as has come to be expected by public servants and members of the public. Under this Memorandum of Understanding, Mr. Speaker, the following activities took place. 73 houses were proposed to be built in Strauns Hill, Fire Trail, and Bahamia West replat subdivisions. Out of the 73 houses, Mr. Speaker, to be built, 55 were completed. The design changed from duplexes to single homes in the Fire Trail subdivision. At the commencement of the agreement, there were some 18 unfinished houses in Abaco, 15 in San Salvador, and 14 houses in John Claridge subdivision that were incomplete. That meant a total of 47 houses needed to be completed. However, these houses were never finished because they were not made a part of the Memorandum of Understanding. Although it was reported that the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation had 14 mortgage requests from Bahamia West replat, none were completed by the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation. In the end, Mr. Speaker, only 25 persons received mortgages from the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation, who now live in Strauns Hill and Fire Trail subdivision. And out of the 55 houses actually completed, only 31 of them were finally occupied, Mr. Speaker. At what cost, Mr. Speaker? HLB Galanis & Co. collected a whopping $10 million and was looking for $2.9 million more. Mr. Speaker, what is so astonishing but not surprising about this is that the duties prescribed for HLB Galanis & Co. were always carried out by public officers. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the activities completed by my ministry. Mr. Speaker, in the manifesto, the People's Government will promise to review and re-engineer the renew and re-engineer the operations at the New Providence Sanitary Landfill. Mr. Speaker, upon coming to office, this is one of the first things we looked at, because we want to tackle the big environmental issues that challenge this country, Mr. Speaker. So, we decided, if you would recall, that we would go through the RFP process again and do it properly this time. Today, I'm happy to report that we are closer to reaching this goal. As you are aware, the Ministry of Environment and Housing issued an expression of interest for the potential investment in management services relating to the deconstruction, remediation, and operation of the New Providence Sanitary Landfill. 7 companies were shortlisted, Mr. Speaker, and each were invited to participate in the RFP process. Of the 7 shortlisted companies, Mr. Speaker, 4 companies have paid the $10,000 non-refundable registration fee and are now completing their bids. The participating companies are as follows: WTP Limited, Bahamas Waste, New Providence Advisors and the Waste Resources Development Group Limited, and APAPA International Nassau Limited. A pre-bid meeting was held at the Department of Environmental Health Services on the 27th of February, and submissions are due on the 9th of April, 2018. Mr. Speaker, this administration, led by my Prime Minister, is committed to bringing lasting change at the New Providence Sanitary Landfill, Mr. Speaker. As was written in our manifesto, it is also the intention of the government to create a Ministry of the Environment by enacting legislation to incorporate existing strands of environment-related policies that are currently scattered in various bits of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, this brings to mind what the honorable member from Elizabeth said, which stands clear in my mind, when he was equally exuberant, when he said our leader and this government is characterized by going long, because the legislative vacuum in the field of the environment has long been recognized, and we're starting down that road to fill that legislative gap, Mr. Speaker. And once again, I'm happy to report that the ministry is in the final stage of finalizing the Ministry of Environment bill, which will be presented to this honorable House in due course, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are painfully aware that we will not change the lives of the Bahamian citizens if we do not act. And act we will, Mr. Speaker. You are all aware of the situation at Clifton Pier. Oil product has been seeping into the ground and ocean for years, Mr. Speaker. The product at Clifton Pier Power Station grounds remains a priority of this government to remediate. And when we say remediate, Mr. Speaker, we don't intend to do as the previous administration by putting a man in a boat with a toothbrush, Mr. Speaker. We intend to bring lasting change, Mr. Speaker. To date, a retaining wall is in the process of being constructed, Mr. Speaker, and we anticipate that this retaining wall will stop the seepage of oil into the environment, Mr. Speaker. The wall itself, the retaining wall, I'm glad the good member mumbled that from afar, but the retaining wall that they started was actually stopped by the Ministry of Works. We're talking about something completely different. New vision, Mr. Speaker, new vision. New vision. And then this wall, in this wall, will have remediation systems designed behind it.
I can say you was good. That was good. I give you that one today. You can take that one home. She was the Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, a number of tests and studies have been done characterizing the oil contamination at Clifton Pier. But this government, led by my Prime Minister, is determined to bring lasting change at Clifton Pier, Mr. Speaker. We anticipate and we know that Clifton Pier is a microcosm of all economic activities that go on in this country, whether it's industrial, whether it's real estate, whether it's antiquities with the Wiley Estate. It links us to our past and connects us to our future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, renewable energy is another component of which my ministry is responsible for, and it represents the future. And my ministry has been taking bold steps to capture the imagination of my fellow Bahamians in relation to renewable energy. Hopefully, in capturing their minds and hearts, we can march boldly to a country powered even more by renewable energy, Mr. Speaker. To this end, my ministry applied to the United Arab Emirates Caribbean Renewable Energy Fund for the installation of a solar photovoltaic system in the form of a covered parking garage at the Thomas A. Robinson National Track and Field Stadium. The proposed $4 million project will offset approximately 900 kilowatts of energy derived from traditional fossil fuel sources, Mr. Speaker, and will also utilize energy efficiency components where applicable. 6 electric vehicle charging stations will be provided to facilitate the Bahamas' transition to a more sustainably developed future. In October of 2017, my ministry signed a memorandum of understanding with the government of the United Arab Emirates on behalf of the Bahamian people. By February 2018, the contract between the national authority and the winning bidder was executed. Construction is scheduled to commence very imminently, Mr. Speaker, and these projects and those to come confirm the government's commitment to addressing the implementation of renewable energy in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. And they will also ensure that Bahamians are fully engaged in the RE economy. Mr. Speaker, the Carbon War Room is a non-profit organization that works with countries to accelerate the implementation of business solutions, reduce carbon emissions, and advance the low-carbon economy. My ministry continues to work with them, Mr. Speaker, to stabilize the cost of electricity for households and businesses, to reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions, to increase investment opportunities and investment returns on island, to increase resiliency of distribution grids, and to enhance and diversify local job markets with higher skilled and better paying jobs. Mr. Speaker, the Green Climate Fund is another such tool. It is a financial mechanism under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is used to assist developing countries to adapt and mitigate practices to reduce the impacts of climate change. At present, $300,000 has been allocated to the Bahamas to build capacity within government and civil society. To address climate change is one of them. And one of the climate change pilot projects presently implemented is the introduction of solar cars to our government's fleet of vehicles. Electric cars, I'm sorry, to our government's fleet of vehicles. There is currently a 25% tariff on the import of electric vehicles, Mr. Speaker. And as a result of this relatively low tariff, electric vehicles have been introduced into the Bahamian market at a lower level. In many instances, it is still cheaper, however, to purchase a conventional vehicle. Therefore, we put the good Minister of Finance on notice that we propose to further increase the amount of hybrid and electric vehicles in the Bahamian market by lowering even further the tariff on electric vehicles. Using hybrid and plug-in vehicles, Mr. Speaker, instead of conventional vehicles can help reduce the Bahamas' reliance on imported fossil petroleum. Further reducing the tariff on these vehicles will be a step in fulfilling the national energy policy, Mr. Speaker. in fulfilling our commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Mr. Speaker, and in fulfilling a healthier environment for Bahamians first, and visitors also will allow them to enjoy it. Mr. Speaker, turning my attention now to the Department of Environmental Health Services. As a part of our national cleanup campaign, Mr. Speaker, and before I delve into that, you would remember that in September of last year, my ministry announced the commencement of the New Providence National Cleanup Campaign and then the National Cleanup Campaign. We talked about dividing New Providence into quadrants, and we asked for the support of the wider members of the public in supporting this initiative, church groups, civic organizations, and of course my colleagues here in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I'm so very, very pleased for the overwhelming support of my colleagues, and I thank them all from both sides of the divide who have thrown their full support behind this initiative, Mr. Speaker. I also would like to point out and thank my Prime Minister for the enthusiasm that he's thrown behind the project in relation to cleaning up New Providence, Mr. Speaker, particularly Bain and Grantstown. And so as a part of our national cleanup campaign, at this point, we have removed approximately 3,000 vehicles. But we are aware that there are thousands more to go, Mr. Speaker. And plans are in place to execute a derelict vehicle program in the Family Islands during the next budget cycle, Mr. Speaker. Phase 1 of the bulk waste program was conducted in Baintown, Centerville, Engliston, Big Pond, and Montel Heights, Mr. Speaker. A total of 850 cubic yards of combined waste was removed, an amount that equates to several football fields, Mr. Speaker. Now underway, we're focusing our attention on Bamboo Town, Pinewood, South Beach, Seabreeze, Fox Hill, and of course, Nassau Village, Mr. Speaker. As members are aware, the rodent control program commenced in Bain and Grantstown as well. And the Department of Environmental Health Services maintains its policy that rodenticide is available at their headquarters on Farrington Road. And if you contact them and come in, they will also put down the powder. But we encourage all Bahamians that want to get started in cleaning up their community to contact the Ministry of Environment 322-6006, or send me a WhatsApp personally, a WhatsApp message that is, personally, as I announced my cell phone number when I announced the cleanup campaign, 457-0619. We're here to partner with the community. The Ministry of Environment and Housing is actually, we're here to serve. We're here to serve the Bahamas. That's our job. And it's the people's time. Mr. Speaker, the Environmental Monitoring and Risk Assessment Division of the Department of Environmental Health Services is actively monitoring the Clifton Pier Power Station situation, Mr. Speaker. The division continues also to monitor oil spills around the Bahamas, fuel companies, and have conducted indoor air quality investigations of public and private buildings, in addition to monitoring the coastal waters surrounding Arawak Heat. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention now to the forestry unit, Mr. Speaker. In 2017, the Bahamas pledged to plant 10,000 trees to contribute to the environmental online worldwide 100 million trees initiative, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, trees are something that we all take for granted, but whether we like it or not, what we breathe out, they breathe in, and what they breathe out, we breathe in. So this is a part of the natural cycle and balance and rhythm of life. And they are essential to life on this planet, Mr. Speaker. And if you don't believe me, try holding your breath for 15 minutes and see what happens. But it's one of those things that are, in a sense, are so esoteric. It is our challenge to bring life to that to make everybody embrace it. So such an initiative promotes the enhancement of carbon sinks and reservoirs for greenhouse gases, Mr. Speaker. The Forestry Unit has partnered with non-governmental organizations, including the Trees That Feed Foundation, to meet this goal. And on the 31st of December 2017, my Prime Minister planted the 10,000th tree at Government House, and it was a mango tree by request. A special thank you is extended to the Trees That Feed Foundation, who donated 700 breadfruit trees to assist the unit to reach its target. Mr. Speaker, immediately after that, the Forestry Unit set the goal of planting 10,000 more trees, Mr. Speaker. And to my colleagues in Parliament, invitations were sent out today to you for World Forestry Day, where we're inviting all members of Parliament in their respective constituencies to plant a tree, for which the Forestry Unit of the Ministry of Environment and Housing will provide to them. All we ask is that you look at the invitation and you call the number and confirm, and those of you who are in the Family Islands, we will ship the tree to you if you so desire. Or if you so desire, we will bring it here for you at this Honorable House. But we want your participation. We want your participation. Ms. No comment. Mr. Speaker, the Global Tree Seed Project is a partnership between the Forestry Unit and the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew, United Kingdom, for the establishment of a seed bank. Mr. Speaker, during the 5th and 8th of December 2017, a workshop was held at the University of Bahamas on seed banking techniques. Similar workshops were held in Grand Bahama, Abaco, and Eleuthera. Mr. Speaker, I wish to draw the public's attention to the fact that the Forestry Act mandates the declaration of the National Forest Estate on Crown lands. Mr. Speaker, the estate will consist of 3 types of forests: conservation forests, forest reserves, and protected forests. The Forestry Unit commenced the establishment of this estate in the 4 Pine Islands, Mr. Speaker: Abaco, Andros, Grand Bahama, and New Providence. The unit also hosted town meetings in these islands, Mr. Speaker, in matters on biodiversity conservation, availability of Crown lands for future residential and business development, enforcement of forestry regulations, and proposed hunting regulations, Mr. Speaker, were discussed with the general public. Forestry staff have received internationally recognized certification in conducting forest inventory assessments through the Global Environment Facility, or GEF, Pine Islands Project. They continue to train, Mr. Speaker, to remain current and sharp for the national inventory assessments. The forestry staff are also certified wilderness first aid respond officers. Mr. Speaker, the ministry is always looking for ways to foster more collaboration with non-governmental organizations. Because when we talk about the work of environment, the government cannot do it alone. And as I highlighted in relation to the National Cleanup Campaign, it is no different for all other elements of the environment. Consequently, the Ministry of the Environment and Housing's Forestry Unit signed a memorandum of understanding with Creative Nassau, Mr. Speaker. The MOU signifies their collaborative efforts for the preservation of Bahamian straw work, Mr. Speaker, and to ultimately have Nassau registered by the United Nations Education and Scientific and Cultural Organization as a creative city. An MOU was also signed between the Ministry of Environment and Housing's Forestry Unit in Abaco with Friends of the Environment on matters of mutual interest, particularly environmental conservation. To pique the interest of students in the environment, Mr. Speaker, a Junior Minister of Environment competition was launched in November 2017. Students were tasked with 6 challenge competitions that covered areas of coastal management, climate change, solid waste management, ecological diversity, and environmental consciousness. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the Bahamas National Geographic Information System Center, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a country, we are still in the process of catching up with geospatial technology. Last year, I had the opportunity of attending the 5th high-level forum on global geospatial information management with the theme, Implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, the role of geospatial technology in innovation. There were over 300 participants from 73 countries, Mr. Speaker, including least developed countries and small island developing states such as our own. The aim of the forum was to substantively improve and strengthen the national geospatial information management capacities of countries, particularly developing countries, towards implementing the 2030 agenda. And of course, we covered evidence-based policy and decision-making. Therefore, it is imperative, and my ministry intends to continue to support the Bahamas National Geographic Information Systems Center, which we call BENGUS, to the best of our ability, Mr. Speaker. As a part of the United Nations on Global Geospatial Information Management for the Americas Caribbean Geodentic Project, the BENGUS Center facilitated the installation of a global navigation satellite system equipment at local government administrators' buildings in Exuma and Great Inagua. Further, the center drafted preliminary efforts on spatial data infrastructure and GIS user needs assessments for the Bahamas. Secure networking relations with the United States Embassy and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency to provide pre- and post-Hurricane Irma imagery to support desktop mapping and focal point for communications. They prepared and distributed Hurricane Irma field maps for Matthewtown, Inagua, and Salina Point, Acklands. They produced and distributed storm surge modeling map products in collaboration with the Pacific Disaster Center. They identified schools to participate in the GIS schools competition to receive curriculum development and planning and training for teachers in New Providence and the Family Islands. Mr. Speaker, I turn my attention now to the Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Authority, which is led by its able and enthusiastic chairman, executive chairman, the member for St. Barnabas.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, the New Providence cleanup campaign would not he'll have his chance. But it's my time now. Mr. Speaker, the New Providence cleanup campaign would not be the success that it is without the assistance of the Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Authority. And so we want to congratulate them and thank them for the work that they do in keeping our public verges and roundabouts clean. Mr. Speaker, they continue to develop our public parks and keep our beaches clean for the residents and visitors alike. The authority is presently engaged in the following activities in New Providence, and I will outline them briefly and defer to the executive chairman further on in this budget debate when he makes his contribution. An over-the-hill development project in conjunction with the Office of the Prime Minister, manicuring and rebeautification of all major roundabouts, cleaning and beautification of beaches, the removal of unauthorized and expired billboards, which are an ever-present eyesore in New Providence, and reconfiguration of vendor stalls and removing derelict vendor stalls at the Western Esplanade. Mr. Speaker, conch is a delicacy in our country, appreciated by citizens from all walks of life, Mr. Speaker, and all age groups. To ensure that our conch reserves remain consistent, Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, the 15th of February, the Bahamas National Trust signed an agreement with the Inter-American Development Bank to advance conservation efforts in the Bahamas. And we all can imagine, or don't want to imagine, a Bahamas without conch. The agreement commits $500,000 to the BNT from the Japan Special Fund Poverty Reduction. The grant is the first from the Japanese government to the Bahamas and the first in the Caribbean. It is the largest grant that the BNT has received for conservation, Mr. Speaker, and it will advance the campaign's goal of creating sustainable fisheries and improve the livelihoods of the fishing communities. the loss of the Bahamian queen conch fishery would cause an ecological, economic, and cultural disaster. This project provides the BNT with the opportunity to work directly with the two communities in Grand Bahama that depend on conch for their livelihood. Mr. Speaker, the Bahama Oriole Project is another joint collaboration between the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the Bahamas National Trust to conduct research on the endemic Bahama Oriole. This bird is considered to be the most endangered bird species in the wider Caribbean. Outreach and research was conducted in October 2017, and they have estimated that there are approximately 2,000 of these birds left in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So we're talking about a very endangered animal. Mr. Speaker, presentations have been made in various schools and communities to appraise the citizenry of the value of this bird and the research that is available for it. A Bahama Oriole poster has been produced and distributed across Andros to educate the public about the bird. Mr. Speaker, partnerships are vehicles to achieve results. On December 16th, the BNT science team spearheaded a mangrove restoration day at Bonefish National Pond for the Rotary Club of East Nassau. The group planted mangrove seedlings and propagules and cleared a small channel to improve water flow. The event was organized in preparation for a larger initiative, Mr. Speaker, that will occur later this year. It is expected that 400 international Rotarians will be participating in a similar mangrove restoration project. And I want to remind the Bahamian public and my colleagues that the green infrastructure, as represented by mangroves, and as I'm sure can be attested to by my good friend, the hometown boy from South Andros, is actually much more effective in preventing storm surges than the built environment. And it's self-sustaining and self-generating, Mr. Speaker. The Caribbean Challenge Initiative is an agreement between the Caribbean government and business leaders to execute a 20-by-20 goal. The objective of this goal is to effectively conserve and manage at least 20% of the marine and coastal environment by 2020. In connection with this, the partners of the Bahamas Protected Oceans 5 project intend to submit a white paper to the government outlining the marine protection plans for existing and newly proposed marine protected areas. To this end, the BNT has conducted stakeholder meetings in Great Exuma for discussion on the area near Leestocking Island, in Inagua for the expansion of the Inagua National Park and the Little Inagua National Park, and on Mayaguana for Curtis Creek and the offshore reef system. The management planning process for San Salvador National Parks is concluded, Mr. Speaker. Electronic copies are now available for circulation. Brochures and large-scale maps with park boundaries and coordinates are being composed for distribution. As the protection of our national parks, the BNT continues to carry out park improvements and maintenance at the Pelican Keys Land and Sea Park, the Blue Holes National Park in Andros, the Leon Levy Nature Plant Preserve in Eleuthera, the Exuma Keys Land and Sea Park, the Rand Nature Center in Grand Bahama, and the Retreat in New Providence. The BNT has also encouraged our young people to care for their environment, Mr. Speaker, through its Discovery Club. Presently, there are some 1,300 children, of which 1,000 are fully paid members. New tertiary level clubs like the Navigators were started at BAMSI in Andros, and the University of Bahamas in New Providence, and the University of Bahamas in the north at Grand Bahama. EcoCamp hosted some 30 young people between the ages of 14 to 18 to a week in Andros, and the youth were immersed in environmental consciousness, Mr. Speaker. I wish to advise that the BNT is completing its preparations for the 2018 Bahamas Natural History Conference, scheduled to take place this month, Mr. Speaker, this month, on the 19th to the 22nd of March at the Bahama Convention Center. And my Prime Minister will open that event, Mr. Speaker. There are currently more than 60 presentations being scheduled, and the output of these meetings will be recommendations that will be presented to the government of the Bahamas. So, Mr. Speaker, again, this is an open invitation to all my colleagues and all those within the sound of my voice to attend this conference. Mr. Speaker, the Nature Conservancy is another such NGO that assists in preserving our common heritage. Because as we have said so many times, our environment is the commonwealth of our commonwealth, Mr. Speaker. Accordingly, with the support of Oceans 5, the Nature Conservancy, or TNC, and its partners carried out the following activities, Mr. Speaker. Advanced a single science-based marine protected areas design process to maximize biodiversity, fisheries, and climate change adaptation benefits while minimizing costs to local communities. Valued key ecosystem services within the MPA network. Demonstrated the economic benefits of investing in an expanded, well-designed and managed network, and now over the next 10 years. Initiated the second stakeholder consultation, Mr. Speaker, series on the islands of Mayaguana, Inagua, Cat Island, Exuma, to ensure that local communities have a voice in determining where the new protected areas will be. Mr. Speaker, the Nature Conservancy also provided support to the Bahamas National Trust for the development of an overarching national park bylaw system and management plans for San Salvador, Abaco, and Mariah Harbor Key. This has laid the foundation for strengthening the on-ground protection and enforcement of the Protected Areas Network and a pilot co-management project set to launch in year 3. Keeping in mind the cost of declaring and implementing the new MPAs and the need for effective management of existing MPAs, Mr. Speaker, the Conservancy and its partners gained a commitment from the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund to further explore a short list of sustainable revenue options to support the management and important work of BPAC. Mr. Speaker, to put succinctly, other accomplishments of the TNC are as follows. Completion of a national marine gap analysis to identify biodiversity gaps and essential ecosystem goods and services not adequately conserved or managed by the country's existing marine protected area networks. Provisions of models to map fisheries and climate resilient corals, Mr. Speaker. Development of first drafts of the white paper proposing new areas to reach the country's 20% marine protected goal. Completion of a financial gap analysis for the Bahamas network of protected areas systems. An implementation plan to guide the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund in reaching its self-sustaining goal and bridge the funding gap that now exists. To provide technical resources, Mr. Speaker, for bylaws for the 32+ national parks managed by the Bahamas National Trust. And we're proud to announce the completion of the San Salvador National Park National Plan, the completion of the first draft of the management plan for Mariah Harbor National Park, and the completion of the National Co-Management Framework for the Bahamas identification of a site for a co-management pilot project between the BNT and the local community group, San Salvador's Living Jewels. Mr. Speaker, on the environmental front, we have demonstrated our commitment to move this country forward through purposeful action, Mr. Speaker. We've tackled the big problems, Mr. Speaker, the big challenges. The landfill, capturing the imagination of the Bahamian public through the installation of approximately 1 megawatt of electricity through renewable energy, dealing with the Clifton Pier contamination issue. Those are big stuff. Those are big milestones. Big milestones. And there's more to come as we continue our important work, Mr. Speaker, as anyone driving throughout the streets of New Providence can see, things already better, to quote someone. The point is, Mr. Speaker, that we will not stop until our work is done, which is to improve the quality of lives of all Bahamians, Mr. Speaker. I turn now my attention to the Department of Housing, Mr. Speaker, for which I am also responsible. At the start of the 2017-2018 budget year, the government planned to progressively pursue the completion of homes in various subdivisions throughout New Providence and the Family Islands. I wish to report that the Department of Housing, under the auspices of the Ministry of Environment and Housing, is now moving in the direction to produce serviced lots, as was announced by my Prime Minister in his national address. Mr. Speaker, service lots are plots of land that include all infrastructure, that is, electricity, water, sewerage systems, telecommunications, etc. Residential service lots will be in a subdivision that the department will sell to first-time homeowners to construct their homes, Mr. Speaker. Giving, land in New Providence is often priced above the reach of the average Bahamian, Mr. Speaker. And we intend to cure that defect because we look at home ownership as a basic human right, Mr. Speaker. And this would allow homeowners to take responsibility for their own design and construction. And additionally, the Department of Housing will not be liable for the construction or maintenance of such homes. Because as you are aware, we continue to be saddled with poor construction for which we are responsible. And persons take possession of their homes and expect for the Department of Housing to maintain them many, many, many years afterwards, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department is reviewing its inventory of available land and has completed this process, and we have identified several areas in New Providence and the Family Islands. Once the details have been finalized, Mr. Speaker, the public will be advised accordingly. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Housing is also pursuing the development of subdivisions in the Family Islands. Service lots will be available for sale to first-time homeowners, second homeowners, or persons interested in bed and breakfast boutiques, thereby assisting Bahamians to get into the tourism industry, Mr. Speaker, and own the industry. Mr. Speaker, for this budget period, the cost for renovations to homes in the government subdivisions has been reduced by 60%. Subsequently, the budget balance allotted to renovation of homes has now been forwarded to the budget for rental units. This diversion of funds has allowed the Department of Housing to carry out the following activities, Mr. Speaker. Repair the rental units so they are brought up to par, conduct major structural and roof repairs to several of its complexes that were not repaired in years, Mr. Speaker, and were damaged, some of which were damaged by the last hurricanes that passed through, and renovate the interior of many rental units that were not repaired again for many, many years. These investments have made tenants in the inner city much more comfortable in their rental units, Mr. Speaker, and has encouraged numerous tenants to actually pay their rent. And so we are happy to report that as of the 31st of December 2017, the rental units division collected $210,958.28 in rental fees, which represents a 19% increase over last year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Housing has now developed a section within the department to pursue persons living in government homes without mortgage facilities and those who are delinquent in those mortgages, Mr. Speaker. Consequently, we've seen an increase of about 10% in revenues from persons who fall into that category. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation reports that for the past 8 months, there's been an increasing trend of requests and subsequent financing of mortgage loans for homes and vacant land, Mr. Speaker, particularly land and homes sold via foreclosure from the various banks and other lending institutions. Further, with the stagnation of the Ministry of Housing's and Environment's home construction project, fewer government-initiated loans were placed in the BMC's portfolio. Therefore, they had to get creative and attract new business and maintaining existing mortgages, which are essential to the BMC's growth and viability. Mr. Speaker, the BMC is also faced with the effects of the mortgage campaigns in the private banking sector, which results in the payout of BMC mortgage loans. In this regard, policies have been established to discourage early repayment of these mortgage loans, Mr. Speaker, where the corporation would have granted financing for additional expenses and shown compassion to when our fellow Bahamians didn't quite meet the mark and reach out to them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the corporation has begun the process of developing its own private home construction program by acquiring affordable vacant land and constructing affordable quality homes for sale, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they finished and completed the homes in John Claridge Estates, and they are now turned their attention to the redevelopment in Queen's Park, Mr. Speaker, where they bought a tract of land containing an old vacant building and derelict vehicles and turned it into 5 high-quality, affordable homes, Mr. Speaker. Over the first 11 months of the past fiscal year, the corporation has been able to place new mortgages, and it's my duty to report them to this honorable House as follows. Under the title Government-Initiated Mortgages, Mr. Speaker, 25 loans totaling $4,131,252, Mr. Speaker. Under the title Private Initiated Mortgages, 44 loans totaling $6,258,299, Mr. Speaker, for a total of 69 loans with a grand total of $10,389,551, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation continues its prudent fiscal management with a view to improving BMC's financial position, Mr. Speaker, and remains committed in its efforts in this regard. Special attention has been given to the management and control of fiscal and operational activities and expenses. BMC is able to adequately service the interest and principal payments to its bondholders while prudently allocating funds to finance new mortgage loans to further the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation's operating and administrative expenses, Mr. Speaker, and as well maintain the sinking fund, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to announce that the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation acquired the buildings on East Hill Street from the Bahamas government. The building is the site of the historic East Hill Club that formerly housed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the historic 200-year-old building and grounds that are currently being refurbished by the corporation to its former magnificence, paying careful attention to the restoration of the historic features of that building, Mr. Speaker. And we hope that this serves as an impetus, as all of this is a part of the Nassau redevelopment, or can be included as a part of this vision for the redevelopment of downtown Nassau, Mr. Speaker. We have paid careful attention in the restoration to the historic, and we respect the historic significance of this building and its historic features. It is noted, and this is important to note, that the renovation and retrofit of the main building, outer buildings, and gardens is being funded entirely by BMC without requiring any subvention at all from the Bahamas government. Once completed, this will end 35 years of BMC occupying rental premises and provided much needed accommodation and allow them to grow and do their important work. Mr. Speaker, Bahamians throughout the length and breadth of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas have been faced with financial challenges over the years due to the downturn in the economy and the resulting economic recessions. The recent hurricanes have made arrears collections even more challenging due to job losses, Mr. Speaker, and cutbacks. The arrears ratio stands at 44%, which includes Grand Bahama, which has a whopping 67%. While this may appear elevated compared to other lending institutions, it must be noted that the quoted ratio includes the entire arrears portfolio, Mr. Speaker. Nevertheless, the BMC Corporation Board of Directors, executives, management, and staff remain committed to collect all of the outstanding amounts due and reduce level of outstanding arrears and carry out the corporation's mandate to stimulate, encourage, and promote affordable home ownership within the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we talk of the environment and when we talk of housing, Mr. Speaker, we are really looking at things that affect us all, that don't know boundaries. As I've said in this place on many occasions, we all breathe the same air and we all drink the same water, all of us. And it is one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a need for safety and security. And we all want some place to lay our heads, all of us, every single person in this room and within the sound of my voice, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, one of the drawbacks, or one of the things that hold us back where we don't see a connection between each other is the fact that we're all born as individuals. And it is the challenge of the ministry and the work of the Ministry of Environment and Housing to bridge that gap so that we see a connection between ourselves, each other, and the environment, Mr. Speaker. Lady Bird Johnson once said that the environment is where we all meet, where we all have a mutual interest. It is the one thing that we all share. And I couldn't agree more, Mr. Speaker. Consequently, Mr. Speaker, the protection of the environment is priceless. Therefore, please be assured that although there have been some successes in the ministry, we shall not rest until we achieve all of our goals, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I would just like to once again thank the wonderful people of Marathon for affording me the privilege to speak on their behalf in this honorable place, and I shall endeavor to do just that without fear or favor. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
I rise to move that the House do sit beyond 7 o'clock.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House proceed beyond 7 p.m. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who are opposed will rise. The business... The chair recognizes the honourable member for South and Central Andros and Mangrove Key.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being all-inclusive. Mr. Speaker, the member, as a senior member, he knows the standing protocol of this honourable place. If we're going to go beyond the standard time, there's normally an agreement between both sides. We don't have no major challenge, but that is the standing protocol in this place. Mr. Speaker, also I must beg leave that due to the service that is going to be held this evening at St. Matthew's Church, the Honorable A.D. Hanna, that I too must leave. So therefore, I must say that's why I would not be able to sit through the session until 8 o'clock this evening. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, are you objecting then?
I objected on that basis because we should have been informed. But I mean, otherwise, I'll acquiesce and understand. Yes.
Thank you.
The leader, I thought that they'd gone through, and I sincerely apologize for the
The motion is carried. The business of the House will continue beyond 7 p.m. As many?
So I didn't... Speaker, sorry. Unfortunately, I was unaware of Mr. Hanna's ceremony, so probably if I had spoken to you and you'd spoken to me, we would have ironed that problem. In light and out in respect to the senior member, former member of the House, I've moved that the House to now suspend till 10 o'clock tomorrow.
Just before we suspend, the member who will lead off tomorrow, is he present?
I stand reserved for the member for Mount Moriah.
Mount Moriah. Thank you, honourable member. It has been moved and seconded that the business of the House suspend to 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. The business of the House stands suspended until 10 a.m. Thursday morning.